Hello, everybody. Welcome to Use Your Items, the podcast about the philosophy and design of the video games we love to play. I am Francisco Martin, here with my lovely co-host, Jason Wise. How are you doing, Jason?
Francisco, I'm doing great. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here recording this with you live in person.
Live in person? What? I can...
Sort of.
Oh, is that why you sound like you're underneath in the first floor of this house?
Oh, yes. Well, that's why I hear all that stomping up above. Yes, yes, dear listener. We are together again, reunited at last, and we are recording in my home in New England, and Fran is just upstairs in our second office doing a recording live with us. So we've been kind of cooking on this one for a little bit in person.
And what are we cooking? What is this game that we're going to be playing today?
Today we are discussing Rose Engine's Signalis, a game brought to us by our now good friend of the show and friend of the podcast, Dr. Dylan Ludeman. Thanks, Dylan, for joining us last time on toxicity in games, and for recommending Signalis to us. So this came from Dylan's psyche, for better or worse, and was recommended to me for the blog, podcast, however you want to call it, as a sort of very late addition. He actually reached out to me and asked if he could sub out one of his previous suggestions for the list originally given for my blog posts and swapped it for Signalis. So pretty crazy that a game that he played, I think at the end of last year, made such an impact that he wanted to swap a game out. I believe we cut Xenoclash, don't quote me on that, or Northern Journey, but both very interesting games in their own right. So now we ended up here in Signalis, and I have to say this was not at all what I expected.
It was, oh my goodness. I am so happy that he decided to have us play this game. This is a game that for me, out of nowhere, I have absolutely no recollection about hearing this game. This game came out in 2022, and it went under the radar for me. And not to get too spoilery about our non-spoiler verdict, this is definitely jumping up to my top 20 at the very least, possibly top 10, but only time will tell.
I think this is a top 10 game for me, for sure.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. But before we get too deep into it, Jason, why won't you tell us what's behind the box?
Searching for dreams inside of a nightmare, awaken from slumber and explore a surreal retro tech world as Elster, a technician replica searching for her lost partner and her lost dreams. Discover terrifying secrets, challenging puzzles, and nightmarish creatures in a tense and melancholic experience of cosmic dread and classic psychological survival horror. Remember our promise.
Oh boy, that remember our promise is just, it gives me so many chills because that so much. It carries so much in the story. What is the promise? That's kind of like the main mystery driving feature at the very beginning, I guess. Like, what is the promise?
Right? It's certainly first and forefront in terms of just discussing what's actually happening in the story. I mean, for our listeners at home who haven't played it, Signalis opens up with a rather sort of psychedelic, in a way traumatic flashback or flash forward, I guess. Sort of a very quick recollection in a booting sequence as you awaken as Elster. Pronounced Elster, spelled LSTR, I believe.
Yeah. Well, and the unit name is LSTR. I think that technically the main character's name is Elster, ELSTER.
Yes,
it's
that's
just
how it's spelled.
It's just the phonetic naming of the unit name, which is just supposed to be an acronym.
Yeah, maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So this is a sort of retro tech, futuristic sci-fi. It does very well doing the sort of alien impression of it's very much suited in this retro futurism experience where everything feels very tactile. The keyboards are very clicky. The monitors are fuzzy. The game comes sort of with a built-in CRT filter and then allows you to sort of amp it up further. It is really sort of creating that structural physical feel of tech, as at least according to the 70s and 80s in sort of perception and in its presentation. So you start off as a replica, a sort of I guess a robot, an android, a cyborg. There's a lot of different ways we can kind of carve that word up or carve those words up to try and make out what a replica is. However, it does sort of blend the line between a clone and a cyborg, and I think that's sort of at the top. But basically, you are a biomechanical humanoid. You present as a like a tall female woman. Yeah,
if you've had any Ghost in the Shell, any Matrix, any cyberpunk, this whole idea of cyber psychosis and all these things, these are pretty well treaded story beats or narratives that other stories have told in the past. The main differentiator, I guess, of this game is that while, I mean, I mentioned cyberpunk, and I was mentioning more cyberpunk as in the genre and or the tabletop RPG, not necessarily the 2077 video game that came out rather recently. But even then, it is, when you think cyberpunk, you really think about all these like gunshots, action, very much like, oh yeah, you have a lot of different cyborg body parts that you can be very powerful and all these things. And this is not Signalis. Signalis is very, very pulled back, the camera gets very pushed onto the main character, and it is going through the lens of a horror game. You are trying to do certain things that we will get into when we get a little bit more story, but if you wanted to kind of get a one-liner as to how this game kind of operates, think your Resident Evil or a Silent Hill game, except that it uses science fiction as the story through line.
Yeah, this really is very much, I would say, in a pretty much just classic cyberpunk. It is very interested in exploring the ideas of humanity and technology and where those lines both intersect, blur, and diverge, and what that sort of means for a burgeoning or changing society wherein technology is constantly updating, growing quicker than maybe we realize, and in some cases stagnating. And interestingly enough, something that stood out to me about this game was the way in which it's really a world that is very technologically advanced to a point, but is in fact very stagnant in that technology. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's start off with, do you have any personal history with this game, Fran?
Nope, none whatsoever. I'll go one further and say that I've never finished a Silent Hill or Resident Evil game. I have played them. I just never owned one, so I never was able to go through it. But I will say that after playing this game, it really makes me want to go back and give those their fair shot.
Yeah, I would say much the same. I've never played Resident Evil or Silent Hill. I played Resident Evil 4 for a little bit on the Wii. Actually, an amazing experience, like playing it with the Wiimote and the nunchuck. But I never played any Silent Hill games. I do recall reading a lot of walkthroughs of Silent Hill because I was very interested, but I was very scared to play them on my own. So I would never actually go as far as to buy them or rent them. I had some friends growing up that were really into Silent Hill, and I never really bridged that gap. But yeah, this certainly makes me kind of want to revisit Silent Hill and Silent Hill 2 specifically.
Does this, I guess my question to you also, going back a bit further then, is what is your relationship with horror games?
So I have I guess my closest relationship with horror games is that I tend to be extremely interested in them. I'll watch like a Let's Play or a playthrough. I'll read about them. I tend to be a little too much of a softie to actually play through them. But I have been kind of bridging that gap a little bit more recently. Earlier this at the end of last year, I played Soma, which is made by Frictional Studios, I think. I'll double check that, but by the same people who made Amnesia, and that is a game that we'll likely cover later in our series. And that kind of was my first venture into it. But like I've always been interested in it. I've always, tried to get into them. Like I said, Resident Evil 4 I played, Soma. I have a bit of a tradition with some of my oldest friends where we would get together and we would pick like a shorter, like 10 hour horror game, and we'd all sit down and like order like pizzas and get beers, and we would sit down and we would be like, we are beating this game tonight, start to finish. Credits will roll by the time the sun rises. And so we would play a horror game all night long, and we would take turns playing through it. And yeah, we got through a few different games like that. We played the first Amnesia. We played Outlast. If you remember that one?
Yeah.
With the camcorder, that was pretty freaky. That was an interesting one. We played through. They played through Soma, and then I beat that one on my own recently. What else? There was a really creepy one that we played through called Visage.
Yes, yeah, Visage. This is the one that the PT spiritual successor kinda.
Yes. And that game was that was a very, very, very scary game. We played that during the pandemic. Like it was basically like two of us in one room, and then like one other person was on their own in Boston, and another person was on their own in Boston. And so there was like four of us in a Discord call, and we were all screaming like children. And I just remember like one of my friends is like, I can't do this anymore. I'm getting nightmares. And I'm like, I will not control this character. I will not play this game. Like that game was very scary.
I have seen Let's Plays for that one. I guess for me, horror games, never really attracted. I would never call myself a horror game fan. I did play Amnesia to beginning to finish, and I did play Outlast. I did not outlast Outlast. I got kind of bored, to be honest with that one.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, it's very a hit or miss, the genre is. And it enters a little bit into the realm of, for me personally, horror games. It's so difficult to maintain that tension for so long. There have been quite a few horror games where I start out super scared, and then halfway through the game, I am just not scared anymore. I'm just running through everywhere because I'm like, okay, where is this item? Oh, hey there, Mr. Monster. I get it. Okay, ooh, scary. Let me go get this thing. And so, at least for me, it's part of it is me not being 100% attracted to that game mode, but also, or game genre. And part of it is the game genre wearing very thin on me very quickly. So it needs to be a shorter game. And thankfully, Signalis is a shorter game. This is a sub 10-hour game. How long to beat has it at 9 hours for most people to beat. So if you want a short and sweet game, this is definitely it. I would say that Signalis is one of those games that the less you know about it, the better.
Absolutely. I wouldn't, honestly, listener, if you're interested in horror games, if you're interested in psychological thrillers, if you're interested in stories that are exploring the, very sort of key, crucial cyberpunk themes and ideas like humanity, cyber humanity, and the intersections of personhood and memory and space. If you listen to the Eye of the Duck podcast and you're listening to their cyberpunk series and you're really into that, you will definitely be very much into this. I've been hearing a lot of that echoing in just my thoughts on this game, and it is short. My total played time, I wrapped the game at 11 hours total, 10 and a half active play, which I thought was awesome that they actually record active play. But so I wrapped in 11 hours, and it's very bingeable. I beat the game in, I think it'll actually say I loaded the game 4 times. So I guess I beat the game in 4 sittings, or maybe Yeah, it must be 4 sittings then,
Yeah.
or 5
Yeah.
plus the initial load.
Well, does it count if you die and reload the game? Do you think?
Well, I died 0 times, so I couldn't tell you.
Yo,
Sorry,
what a
I'm a real gamer.
What a gamer.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I really love about this game is that when you wrap the game at the very end, it will give you a result screen that will tell you total game time played, active play times, time saved, loaded, died, average time between saves, like all this cool like metrics and stuff that honestly I wish every single player game had. Like I just love a metric of like you used a health potion 3,700 times. Like if Final Fantasy VII, the original, wrapped with like a, I guess like your FF7 Square Enix wrapped at the end of the game, I don't think that could make games worse.
It's if your favorite part of a Civilization game is the at very end where you get to see the timeline of what resources everybody had and what tech everybody had at what time. This is the game for you. If you're looking for good games with a good recap at the end. Is that sounds like a Twitter account waiting to happen? Games
Honestly,
with recaps.
though, I think that would honestly be sick. I can't get over, like, maybe it's just the novelty because not a lot of games do stuff like this, but I don't know. Like I had an average. Okay, so this is certainly not a spoiler, but it's a survival horror game with a fixed camera angle, just like Resident Evil 1 and I believe Resident Evil 2 as well. I'm not so sure about that, but Silent Hill. So fixed camera angles and save rooms, just like you had typewriter rooms in Resident Evil. You have save rooms with just a computer screen in Signalis, and I had an average time between saves of 11 minutes and 25 seconds. So I was saving constantly because I was terrified of losing progress.
Did you ever accidentally not save?
Once.
And you saw the message?
Oh my god, that was great.
That was
if you go to
so creepy.
It was so creepy. If you go, so when you walk into a save room, maybe this is I don't know if this is a little bit of spoiler, but I'm okay with it. So if you walk into a save room and you walk up to the computer monitor and you go into save and you choose to exit without saving, just like that screen, the game will ask if you're sure, and then you say yes, and then it just cuts to black with bright red lettering, and it just says, "You will regret this." Amazing. Just like the game is just so willing to absolutely fuck with your brain and just fuck with you as you play through it. And it just is so great. Such an awesome experience. Maybe we should touch on, I touched on that fixed camera angle. Let's touch on game design a little bit.
Sure. So, as Jason was saying, fixed cameras is the name of the game here. There is a few portions of the game that are in kind of pseudo first person, kind of look around, but for the most part, you are always going to have a fixed camera angle, which is going to be top down, not 100% top down, maybe 70 degrees at an angle from the top to the bottom, so just a little bit to give you a little bit of height and everything. And this seems like we are 2 for 2 revisiting what does camera mean from a directorial position. We talked about this in Obra Dinn, Return of the Obra Dinn. Great
Very
game.
similar.
Go listen to it if you haven't. And we talked about how in Return of the Obra Dinn, the death snapshots really work around the idea of the essentially the con of game design, where the director can't really force you to look at anything, because if the player has control over the camera, you don't 100% know where the player is going to be looking when something happens. So a lot of games like Return of the Obra Dinn have a way of, okay, I can't control where you're looking, but I can control where you start. So I'm gonna start you here looking in this direction. Signalis has a very different directorial approach to camera, and the approach is we decide where to put the camera. We are always going to put the camera at this angle, and there is a lot of implications as to what that causes to the game. It means that you can see a lot more of the room than you would otherwise be able to see, which means that sometimes you'll get to see monsters that you wouldn't have been otherwise been able to see if it was first person. And it's funny how in horror, there's always the fear of the unknown, but there's also the fear of the known. Like, you know there's something there, and you know there's no way around it. You must figure out a way to get past it, and that fear, because is so present in Signalis, because there is so many times where the camera shows you just enough to show you, hey, there is something here. We're not going to show you how many or what it is or anything like that, but there is something here. And you've already explored all the rooms, so obviously this is the only room that you're going to have to explore. What are you going to do now? Are you going to go in guns a-blazing? Really? Are you going to waste all your ammo? I like that. Are you going to try to sneak? Items? You're going to use your items, so to speak? And it just does a really good job at doing that. And we're going to see a lot of things in this game that are very decisions that the designers made, and they are decisions that are either unconventional, or if they are conventional, they have decided to use it in a way that shows what the best of a design can affect the genre that it is in. And we will get a little bit of more of that into spoilers, because there is some more to talk about cameras. And it's such a weird thing to say that there is something I can't really talk about cameras because it affects the spoiler, but that's just the type of game this is.
There's quite a bit beyond the veil of spoilers here, friends. So we will do our best to spend some time not spoiling the game and kind of talking around some stuff, but I do think that we're going to end up getting to spoilers a little bit sooner than we traditionally do, just because there's so much behind that curtain.
Yeah.
And then on that, just like thinking about that idea of these fixed camera angles and what that directorial purview means to this game, to Signalis in particular, is that for me, it just creates an intensely authored and produced vision for each scene. So like when we discussed Celeste a few weeks ago, it was the same idea, right? You have screen to screen to screen action in Celeste, and there Maddie Thorson was very carefully cultivating an experience of play on this screen to play on that screen to play on that screen to a much different end for a much different function and form. But the idea is the same, right? We have a fixed camera angle. In that case, it's 2-dimensional instead of isometric and 3-dimensional here. And those hyper authored directorial, I'll call them shots in Signalis, I think are what lend so much credence and power to the horror of the game, to the terror and fear in the game. So even in situations where you can see monsters in the room, but they don't see you or they haven't reacted to you yet, you are still, you are only given so much information, and you are left with this the sense of, I'm seeing what they want me to see. So if I can see monsters, that must mean that either the challenge in the room is laid out in front of me, or there's going to be more around the corner. And there's some really interesting twists on the gameplay in Signalis and the ways that it asks you to traverse room to room that can create a lot of intense feelings of pressure and emotion and fear as you have to go from room to room. I found my experience personally in each particular section of the game's, I think, very sectionally based, or at least puzzle based, in terms of like once you achieve this, there's one sort of mega puzzle that's kind of guiding the section of the game that you're in, and then once you solve that, you kind of move on to the next, or it could be like the game ending puzzle or something like that. But the general idea being that you are you have all these little puzzles that are kind of like sectioning off parts of the game that are going to lead you towards solving the bigger one, and you just get you get so intensely familiar with the spaces that you're in, and they are horrible, horrifying, terrible places to be, but you're like, okay, there's 2 monsters in that room, and then there's a monster in that room, and it's hard to kill that monster over there, and I have 12 bullets, and I know I couldn't hold bullets in this other room, so I left some bullets over there, but I have 2 health kits, and I need to go here, and I don't know where that thing is, and I have to explore, and like, there's this push and pull of this place is very scary, I don't know what to do, to this place is now entirely a puzzle, and I'm here to solve it. And one of the other design aspects of Signalis that I think is just so incredible is the way it uses limited item space, limited inventory space to just like an absolute just masterstroke of horror.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the limited inventory in this game, it really shows how in a lot of games they use the power-ups or items as kind of like a power fantasy, pretty much giving the player more tools to become more powerful. And Signalis is a masterclass on how do you do the inverse? How do you remove items, make the player not have those things to feel hopeless and to feel weaker and to feel small. And I think it's we're gonna be talking a lot about one of the interviews with the Rose Engine by Waypoint, and they actually did talk about this, about the inventory system and how it was a little bit contentious with some players because I'll just say it outright, you only have 6 slots in your inventory. Every single item carries the same amount of space. Even from a small little chess piece to a full-on shotgun, they both take the same amount of space. And so there was a little bit of contention about that design decision. Yuri Stern, one of the 2 developers from Rose Engine that worked on Signalis, they said, "Personally, I think if you're comfortable in a survival horror game, something isn't quite right. To me, pushing the player to make decisions that make them uncomfortable is what horror is often about. We designed much of the game around the number 6, but tested the game with various inventory sizes." They then go to talk a little bit about going down to 5, going a little bit above. But this actually made me go down, if you would allow me, Jason, a little bit more about limited inventory.
Go off, fam.
I mean, I guess I'll start with, how did you feel about the limited inventory? Did you feel...
I thought it was great. Like, it was certainly limiting, and I appreciated it. Like, the tension of, I have 6 inventory slots. How many guns do I take with me? Like, I have to get stuff to bring it back. And notably, you have like a storage, just like in Resident Evil, right? You have like a permanent storage in your save rooms that you can drop stuff off in, so you're not, constantly juggling. But you only have access to it in save rooms, and save rooms are often in like very inconvenient places versus where you need to be in the level. So I thought it was a very fulfilling and satisfying experience, I guess, to be dissatisfied with my inventory space. It was I loved it. I thought it was so well done. And that being said, I do know one thing, and I don't know if you're gonna bring this up, so stop me if I'm gonna step on your toes, but I do know that in the original 1.0 release of Signalis, the inventory system was very, very, very different than it is in the way that we played it.
I did not know that. Please share.
So what I will say is that notably there are flashlights in the game, and there is a camera in the game.
Yeah.
And in the original release of Signalis, in the 1.0, the flashlight and the camera take up an inventory slot, one of your 6.
That is how I played it.
Really?
Yeah, at least when I was playing it on Steam, the flashlight and the...
So you played it on the original inventory scheme then.
Okay,
I played it on the
know.
Revised.
I mean, that makes a lot more sense. There are a couple other items that don't take up inventory slot. So it does seem a little bit ridiculous that the flashlight and the camera would take up an inventory slot. We'll talk in a little bit more in spoilers what the implications of those items are, because that in of itself can be considered a spoiler. But there are some items that I would maybe consider them upgrades, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's good to hear that they actually went back and updated that, because those were a little bit annoying, at least for me. To be like, I just ended up never using them almost always.
Right.
In
That
fact,
was
the flashlight, I would have never used it unless, but there are certain areas where the game forces you. The game says it's too dark to open the door. And it's like, okay, fine, I'll go back and get my dumb camera and wish I could put it on my mouth so that way it doesn't take up an inventory slot, but
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so they revised the inventory system after a lot of feedback in play testing and 1.0 to the way that I played the game, which is with the revised inventory system, in which the camera and the flashlight just are permanently in your inventory and they do not take up slots. However, they do need to be equipped. You have two equipped slots. You have like a utility item equip slot, and you have your main equip slot. Your main equip slot is mostly for your guns. I think it's exclusively for your guns.
Yeah.
And so they also revised it as well when they added the more, I guess, fair, quote unquote, inventory system. They allowed you to modify your inventory size. So you could play with 6 slots, or you could play with 8 slots, or you could play with
interesting
4 or 5 slots. You could reduce it as well if you wanted like a more challenging experience.
Interesting.
Which, as I understand it, is in line with. Forgive me if I misspeak. I'm not familiar with the Resident Evil series. I believe in Resident Evil 2, you have different characters you can play as, and different characters have different inventory sizes. And so there's like a bit of history in the genre that Signalis is speaking towards with this. So that whole limited inventory system, I think, is absolutely critical to the experience because, like you said, you need the flashlight to solve puzzles in this game, or at least to solve some traversals. And there are implications to using the flashlight. And in the original method, like, you have to carry it around. And what they found was they wanted people to use these items. You're welcome. And they wanted people to use these items first and foremost. And the intense pressure of not being able to include them in their, like, having to include them in their main inventory made them do exactly what you did, which was not use them. So, like, I used the camera quite a bit.
I did not. I never.
Right.
Used the
Why
camera.
would you? It takes up an inventory. You can't afford it. Like,
you,
God forbid, you need repair spray.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to take a step back and let's talk inventory. Inventory is such a interesting design space in games because it is not something that I think people consider very sexy. Not many. I don't think that any game has sold its pitch based on its inventory, right? But it is a very big part of a lot of games, and it is very important to get right. So let's talk a little bit about different types of inventories. You have your no limit inventories. These are your Pokemon, your Metal Gear Solid. You can carry a whole arsenal, more than anybody. Your Dooms, you can just carry, your character is just superhuman, and you can just carry infinite amount of anything, or as much as the computer will allow before you do a buffer overflow. That's good for simple action games. That's good if you want to have the player keep pushing forward, never have to look back, always find new things, and, keep moving. There's soft limits, inventories with soft limits. These are games like your Skyrim, where you have an inventory max, but it's considered by weight, and if you go above it, then there's some effect applied to you to kind of like encumber you or make you slower or do something to kind of like push you towards not having a full inventory, but it doesn't like straight up stop you from doing it. This is good for encouraging a lot of different playstyles. Really good for, hey, I just want to grab everything, and I know I've killed everything, and I know it's going to take me a while to walk back, but that's okay. I'll take that cost. Let's the player have a little bit of choice. Then there's the inventory minigame. I love these. These are games where you have a sort of mini game, so to speak, to kind of like fit your inventory within your backpack. The most obvious solution to this is that your backpack is a grid, and items have different amount of cells that they can take up space, and it's kind of like a little jigsaw puzzle of you trying to fit all your things in the right place. This one is probably one of my favorite inventory types. It makes the feel bads of inventory management be feel goods when you're like, oh yeah, I got everything fitting and everything.
Yeah.
And it also helps selling the why an item doesn't fit, right? Because like I was talking about before, like, oh, the shotgun takes up the same amount of space as a little chess piece. Like, oh, are you kidding me? Oh, in these minigame ones, you'll see, okay, the shotgun takes 6 slots while that chess piece takes 1 slot. Okay, fair enough. I can see why I cannot have these two things in the same spot. And then you have Signalis. Signalis is a hard limit. You only ever get 6 spots. You get no more, no less. You use it or you lose it. And if you do not have space, you essentially are going to be backtracking or destroying your item. Now, I want to make sure that the listeners understands that from game design, backtracking is not a bad term. Backtracking is a neutral term. There can be very bad backtracking. There can be very good backtracking. There's even a whole genre based on backtracking. It's called Metroidvanias, right? Like that whole game, like 50% of the time, you're going to be backtracking.
Right. Souls-likes do that all the time.
Yeah, Souls-like do that all the time as well. So backtracking, when we talk about that, it is a neutral term. In Signalis, backtracking is, in my opinion, both good and unfortunately a little bit annoying. I think that backtracking was amazing whenever I didn't have that much weapons, right? Because I essentially needed to sneak around monsters, get to the other side, hope to God that there was another save point or something else over there. And then when you invariably get over there and there isn't, you're like, oh no, I need to backtrack through all those monsters. And it wasn't an oh no of, oh my God, this is annoying, this is dumb. It was more of an oh no of like, this is gonna be difficult, this is gonna be scary, this is gonna be rough. However, I did find myself a few times that if I just killed all the monsters in the area and I now needed to backtrack, and backtrack was not satisfying, it was just walking simulator, like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna walk back to an area that I know 100% that I'm safe. This is more annoying than anything. And the reason it is a little bit annoying is because that hard limit on your inventory is so aggressive towards you making, if you make the wrong decision, you're wasting time. And by that I mean is that sometimes you'll go into a room, you'll not have complete information, you'll see a room and you'll see, oh, a health pack, I'm gonna pick that up. You pick it up and then you notice, oh, a puzzle piece that I do need to solve the next puzzle, which is in the next room over. And if I do not pick it up, I'm gonna have to go all the way 5 other rooms and put stuff away to come drop all this and come back. Then when you go to pick it up, you have no space in your inventory. What the heck? This is such, and it happened so many times where there was an item before the key item just to entice you to pick up something that is wrong. So that way, if you don't have any more room, like, I personally do not see what would have been so wrong with just having a swap command. Be like, hey, oh, you're full right now. Would you like to swap one of your items and leave that item here? Done. I'm not saying like we need to have bigger inventory. I'm not saying that we need to. I don't want it so that you can drop it anywhere, because then obviously you have the bad design of people just drop, pick up, drop, pick up, drop, pick up, hoping that the drop is like 1 inch closer to where you're going. So you're just you're just juggling the item.
That was the Pal World experience.
Yep, the Pal World. So in the end for me, I mean, I've already said that I love this game. It wasn't too much of a problem for me. I don't think that the hard limit is 100% necessary. I think that it was probably the simplest solution, the simple means to an end. The game is made by only 2 people. They did it over the pandemic. We will talk a little bit more about the development in a little bit, but it makes sense that for what they have done, given the resources that they have, sometimes you just need to just decide, you know what, this is a simple solution. It meets our ends. We're not going to look any deeper into it. So that's my my piece with specifically the inventory, because I do think that inventory in horror games is so important to get right. And I think for the most part, Signalis did a good job. I do think that Resident Evil does have like that mini game in some of their games. Some horror games just for me feel like they have a more forgiving for immediate micro actions versus macro decisions. I want horror in the macro sense of these are the items I'm taking to the next exploration, and now I have made a wrong mistake and now I am screwed, versus I made a mistake in the micro of picking up one item accidentally and now I'm being punished by forcing me to go back 5 rooms or whatever and just to get the item back. If you're even lucky, because sometimes you're unlucky and it's a one-way trip, right? Sometimes you can go back.
Yeah, I think I agree to an extent. For my experience, I didn't do a lot of backtracking in the sense of, oh, I have this thing, I want to pick up this other thing, so now I need to go back and drop it off. I destroyed a ton of items, and I used a ton of items when I didn't have to, because I simply did not want to backtrack more or fight through rooms or spend much time really like in the backtracking of it all. So I destroyed a lot of repair kits. I never destroyed bullets. I destroyed repair kits. I used repair kits when I was like 75% health. And so for me, I found I really enjoyed that tension of you don't get to swap items. You don't even get to destroy every item in your inventory. So notably, the only items that you can destroy are, I believe, healing items and bullets.
Interesting. I destroyed bullets because
I think I did too.
It wasn't an accident. It was more of I thought I missed a weapon and I thought that I missed it. I'm never gonna get that gun. So these bullets are useless. So
I know what you're talking about.
So I just destroyed them and regretted it for a while. Yeah.
But for my experience, I did enjoy that tension of I want to pick everything up. I want to use everything. But I'm kind of stuck in this position of I have story items. I don't know when I'm going to need them. I'm probably going to have to drop them off, but I want to continue moving forward on this path that I'm on. And the experience of having to drop an item off or destroy an item, I felt was like very, very much in line with the intended authorial experience of having to make very, very difficult decisions that are directly relative to your process and your trajectory through the game. So for me, I thought it was great. I loved it. I do enjoy a little inventory mini game sort of puzzle that you get from the weapon kit in Resident Evil. But I also like the idea of you get 6 items. That's it. Full stop.
It's very simple and clean. So I do agree with that. It's really nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to jump over to the story? Or
I think we should. So, straight up, Signalis is just a game where the less you know going into it is better. That's sort of what we already said at the top there. But again, just to reiterate, there's a lot that goes on in a game that's as concise and well written as Signalis. So I would say really don't do a lot of research other than maybe what you can find on like the Steam page. I think anything that's like an intended authorial experience for like what to know before you buy the game is pretty good. But what I can tell you is you open up playing as Elster. You are a playable, that is the playable character. You are, like we said, an LSTR replica unit, and you've crash landed on an unknown planet. And the human pilot of your ship, Ariane, is missing. You must find her and fulfill your promise. So that's kind of the first and foremost. That's really all it is. She's MIA, and you are an artificially created person, robot being. And
it seems like there's some level of biological, some level of mechanical to it.
You're both. So you're, I guess, a cyborg or an android.
Yeah, except I don't know if this is part of the definition of a cyborg, but these are created units. Cyborg, sometimes people think cyborg kind of like Teen Titans, where it's a human who has been a lot of their body parts have been replaced by robotic. These replicas were never human. Or
Yeah.
were they? I mean, that's another question to be had about certain things that happen in the game. Just to give you a little bit of the visuals on these replicas, they are incredibly humanoid. There's only a few differences on them. Their faces are probably the only thing with like skin, if you would consider that as a human. Everything else is more mechanically black, like muscular type of thing. Kind of think your cyber ninjas and stuff like that, where you can see kind of like the muscles through. So kind of like that. They have this weird horizontal line that goes across their face and through the bridge of their nose. So you can very well. This isn't a case of your Westworld where the androids are so human-like that part of the question is who, or not, Westworld, but even more so, better would be Battlestar Galactica, where
Right.
there's a big question of like, who is the human, who are the robots? Oh, I don't know. Here, you know who are replicas and who are humans from the get-go. They look different. You can tell which one is which. So yeah, that is a big thing. Here, the replicas and the non-humans are called gestalts or gestalts. I don't know how you would say that. Gestalts. Those are biological humans
That's
in
the
world
you
of,
and me of it all.
yeah, you and me of it all.
So
And that is it. That's all we can talk really about the story, unless you
I
have
would
something
say.
else in the spoiler free.
I mean, I would just lean on. I guess it's not too much. Once you know that the biological humans are called gestalts, if and then the androids are called replicas, spelled with a K. It's pretty obvious, I think, at first that this is a game that has quite a bit of sort of just like German language and German culture in it, and that makes sense. The designers are German, I believe.
Yep, they are.
So there's quite a bit of there's some really interesting parts where there's overlap of Japanese design and culture. The animations are animated very much like in like the service of like an anime, and a lot of the text is in Japanese characters. But then there's also quite a bit of text that's in German, and then there's whatever localized language you're choosing to play it in. So there's a really interesting. Well, I guess what I would point to is the way that retrofuturism tries to understand and portray culturalism and different cultures in the future. And it can be in a few different ways. You know, Firefly famously kind of had the Chinese language mashed with English to kind of show like a cultural supremacy of these two cultures that disseminated into language moving forward into the future. And in the Alien series, you have the main company, the main, I guess, corporo evil Wayland Yutani company corporation, and there's a bit of ways in which that setting, that theme, is interested in how Japanese futurism meets Western futurism. And we see this this is sort of writ large in the space of cyberpunk and in quite a few of the inspirations for Signalis, specifically stuff like Cyberpunk, the RPG, like Fran mentioned, Isaac Asimov's iRobot, Ghost in the Shell, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Dead Space, Resident Evil, Silent Hill. I mean, the list goes on. You could go into Blade Runner. I mean, the ways in which replicants from Blade Runner and replicas in Signalis sort of overlap are pretty startling at times. So I think as far as the story is concerned, that's kind of where I would leave it. I will say it is a horror game. It is violent. It is gory. It is beautiful and elegant in its own way, but it is certainly not something that, if you are reticent towards even animated gore or horror, I would say maybe this is not a good one for you. This is not just sort of psychological. Although the effect can be mostly psychic, there's quite a bit of viscera involved, and I think the meat, so to speak, of it all is what's really interesting to me. The flesh of Signalis.
Yeah,
and that's one of the main themes that kind of stick out to me in Signalis, is the way it's a game that's deeply interested in humanity, both from a psychic, mental, emotional standpoint, but also from quite literally the flesh of it, right? The meaty, wet, biological bits that make up humanity is something that is under intense focus by Signalis and the themes and the story beats that we're staring at here. So there's a little bit of, I might quote David Cronenberg's works. If you're unfamiliar, he is a famous science fiction horror director, known for Crimes of Tomorrow, Existenz, The Fly, stuff like that. So a lot of body horror, a lot of flesh. There's a sort of wetness or moistness to Cronenberg's work, and that comes from a position of wanting to explore and understand what humanity is and how humanity works, because it is something that is so intensely biological, which is almost weird to say, right? That biological life is biological or something like that. But I think it's very easy to sort of get lost in the sauce when it comes to trying to understand human nature better and forget that we're animals. We have impulses, we have instincts, we have basic responses that are oftentimes out of our control, and sometimes frustratingly so. It's a very grounding, sort of humbling experience to be reminded that, we're all just meat bags, right?
Yeah.
That's one that really sort of stuck out to me as far as like some of the themes that got me interested and kept me interested in Signalis, and of course we're exploring that in the ways in which replicas are both biologically human creations, but they're also artificially as well, and they're generically created as artificial. So yeah. There's quite a bit going on in the game, and it's one that's, I think, overwhelmingly emotional and sort of psychically overwhelming. I'm going to come back and use this phrase psychic and psychically quite a bit over the course of the game and over the course of this podcast, as it's the only way I was able to kind of properly gather my thoughts in terms of something that is both emotional and mental, and it's kind of like the mixture point between, the sort of logical, emotional, mental space that we occupy as people, as living things. So
yeah, I'm letting you go off because I don't want to talk about any of this thing right now. I want to go wait until the spoilers, because okay. I personally feel like I'm just gonna repeat myself if I talk here right now about those things, and then am like, I'm going to say all this again during the spoiler, but now with the actual stuff that I actually want to say. So yeah.
Let's wrap up some of the stuff on themes, intentions, and feelings. Let's go to the history of the game development, and then we're going to go to we're going to probably wrap spoiler free section there. Yep. So the game was released on October 27th, 2022 for most platforms. This is a newer game, so this just came out I guess a year and a half ago or so. It was in development by the design team, I guess, Rose Engine, since 2014. Rose Engine is co-founded by Barbara Whitman and Yuri Stern. Both are illustrators and game designers residing in Hamburg, Germany. And Signalis started out as the very first digital game that Rose Engine started to develop. And it is the first prototype of the game was like a 2D side scroller, much lower resolution. I first heard about this game on the 2022. Well, it was probably in the 2022 year of Into the Aethers podcast, wherein I think not Brendan, Steven Hilger brought it to the show, and it actually ended up on their top 10 games of the year. And it was, I didn't really know much about it more than it was like a Resident Evil inspired horror game. And it was one that was on my list. Actually, if you follow me on Backlogged, I'll put a link in the show notes. I have all of the games that I'm interested in and the games that we're playing on the show on a Backlogged link. And it's been on a list of games that I missed in 2022. I always keep a list of games that I miss in a year because I never get to them all. And I like to have them in a place to revisit because it's very easy to get overwhelmed, right? So I had it in that list, and then Dylan reached out to me and asked to put this on the list, and so I was like, yeah, sure. But pretty crazy to think. I think this is the newest game on our list.
Yeah,
I'm almost positive.
Sure.
I'm gonna look that up really quick.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I think yes.
Yeah,
probably, definitely.
What about are any awards on this, Fran?
So it was nominated for over 20 awards, won at least 6. Steam stats has it at 7.1 million in gross revenue. That is way too low. This game, I feel like it should be way higher, over 473,000 units sold. The average play time is 14 hours, and that might be a little bit weirded out for people who heard us and say, hey, how long to beat this 9 hours? And this is saying the average play time is 14 hours. What's going on there? There is a reason, and we will be talking about it in a bit. But let's wrap this up. What's your spoiler-free verdict?
Play the game. It's just incredible. It's moving. It's emotional. It's beautiful. It's scary and terrifying. I played the game mostly on a Saturday morning and afternoon in the daylight, and it was still very moving and appealing. And I all I can say is I cannot wait to see what Rose Engine does next, because they absolutely killed it here. And if it's going to if I need to wait 8 more years for the next Rose Engine game, I'll wait them patiently, because this was so good.
The next Rose Engine game is already out.
Really?
Yeah, you have to go over to Germany. You have to go to a museum exhibit, and the game is called Insect Builder.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. And it's in a museum.
It's in a museum. It's a work for hire game it's kind of like an interactive insect builder game that you can just play. I guess they got hired by a museum, and they're like, yeah, sure, we'll make a cute little insect builder game, and you can make your own little insect.
That's actually amazing. I love that so much. Well, I'll go then. I'll be hopping on a plane to Germany.
Yeah, it's. You might have noticed, dear listener, that we did not talk much about the development of the game that we usually do, and that is not because we wanted to make this shorter and get to spoilers. That was because that's it. These people are very, very private people. There's barely any interviews with them. I could only find 3 total interviews, some of which we will be quoting during this recording. But they are very private people. They kind of made this game, blasted it out, talked a little bit on Twitter, and pretty much have gone, not radio silence, because they still have updates to the game. Like, they've made some bug updates, they've added some cutscenes and stuff like that here and there, but very much moving back into the development room, I guess, so to speak. My personal verdict is definitely play it. I read a review that was one of my favorite Steam reviews ever. It was, do not wait for this game to go on sale. Pay full price for it. It is that good of a game. I would say it is $20. I would say it goes on sale all the time. I think I bought it on sale because it was in time that I was going to play it. I am ashamed, and I wish I would have paid full price for it. So yeah, wait until it's not on sale. Pay full price.
Yeah, it was just on the Game Pass on on the Xbox Game Pass, not on the Nintendo or the PlayStation. It is actually on Nintendo Switch, not on PlayStation, but I was just making a bad joke. It was on Game Pass. It no longer is, and I believe it's in the Humble Games collection. So I believe you can get it from Humble Bundle directly,
Yeah.
from that website. And you can also purchase the soundtrack. I will likely be featuring songs from the game in the recording of this episode, like I've been doing in previous ones. So if you're interested, please, at the very least, support their composer by picking up the soundtrack on Bandcamp. We will put links to everything below. You can also go to their website if you are curious and you are unsure if the game is for you. They have a list of content warnings on their website that you can get to directly. So that's a great way for you to kind of see if this is exactly what you're looking for. I will say the game definitely feels like it came out of left field, I think, for a lot of people in 2022, but it does kind of it definitely goes back to, I believe, 2021 was some of the first featured moments, first featured views of the game. So it's fantastic and incredible. I highly recommend it. And if you're going to leave us now after about a quick little hour, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is Use Your Items. We are a podcast about the philosophy and design of video games and the reasons why we play them. My name has been Jason Weiss, and joining me, as always, is my effervescent co-host, Francisco Martin. So thank you so much for joining us. If you want to join the conversation, you can find us on Discord, link in the show notes below. You can find me on Twitter sometimes, but try Discord for now. And Fran, where can they find you?
You can find me on Threads and Instagram on L_Fantastico. L is EL, like the Spanish article, _Fantastico, but always, as always, also in the Discord. We are trying to be a little bit more active on the Discord, talking about what is the game that we're currently playing for the next podcast, to kind of give it a little bit of a video game book club feel. So if you ever want to play the games before the podcast comes out, join us there.
Yep, you can find us on that Discord. We hang out in there a lot. Sometimes we'll just play Valorant or Overwatch there, or we'll be there talking to some friends about different games that we're playing or something that's coming up. But feel free to join the conversation either in text or in speech. We'd love to have you, and we hope to see you there. And if not, I hope you have a wonderful weekend and a great week. All right, folks, if you're still here, if you're still with us, welcome to the spoiler section.
Jason,
things are going to get a little crazy.
Jason, I only need to ask you, what the fuck?
I know, man. What the fuck?
What the fuck, dude? What the fuck is up with this game, dude?
It's nuts. It's just, I had such an intense feeling of, I know exactly what this game is. I could not tell you how much I sat down, I watched the opening credits, I was like, all right, I'm a cyborg. Okay, I'm getting like Blade Runner. I'm getting like Neon Genesis. I'm getting Ghost in the Shell. I swear to God, I felt very sure of the experience I was going to get. I was like, oh, I'm gonna get like, ooh, it's gonna be Dead Space, Resident Evil. Like, it'll be fun, I'm sure. I was not expecting the intensity and the sort of reservation that they showed at the same time. I was really just sort of struck by how well they balance those two things. That experience of both everything that's happening is either very quietly presented or just so intensely powerful.
Yeah, this is definitely a game that there's very few games that have made me cry. This is a game that made me actually cry. I got very teary-eyed by the end of this game. We will talk, for those of you who haven't played the game, who are here for spoilers, but just because maybe it's not your cup of tea, or maybe you just really like us and want to listen to what we have to say. Thank you for being here. We will go over the story as much as we can. But for me personally, it was one of those things that I finished it. I was so emotionally... It attacked me so emotionally, and I'm not sure if I am comfortable saying why. Even I might work up to it by the recording of this podcast. We'll see. But it was one of those things where I got very emotionally invested, and right afterwards I called my girlfriend and I cried and all these things, and
Aw.
it was very emotionally intense for me, at least
Yeah.
personally. We have in our show notes that we're going to talk about game design first, but I kind of feel like we should give a little bit of a quick rundown of the story before we
I guess what I want to ask you in terms of how you want to talk about the story
Sure.
here is that I'm referring to our show notes here, dear listener, but Fran does a lot of research and he organizes the show notes for the recordings, and I do the editing for a little inside baseball. So thank you, Fran, as always, for all of that. But looking at these, you're kind of interested in this idea of the ambiguity behind the real quote unquote story
Yes.
of Signalis. And so I guess for me, the way I think about Signalis is that the story that you end up telling yourself at the end of the experience is as real as any 2-hour video on YouTube might be.
I agree. When I finished this game, I immediately stopped. I put myself in an isolation chamber for Signalis, and I wrote down what I felt, what the story was for me, what essentially I wrote the story out, like this is what I think happened. And I think the Signalis is it is one of those games where what actually happens isn't as important as what you think happens. It is one of those things where technically there are, like Jason was saying, a 2-hour video where it tells you a little bit more objectively what certain things are. But I think that those things, the way that Rose Engine has told this story, and they've mentioned it before in interviews where they're just like, hey, this is a story about you figuring out what is real, what isn't real, what is important, what do you value, and all these different things. And yes, we have a story in mind that we have told, and we have clues in there for those people who do want to go crazy and want to go into the lore and figure everything out. But we don't believe that that in of itself is the real story here. What your emotional journey playing this game is more valid of a story than what we have written down in the pages. And so when I was talking about if we wanted to talk about the story, I'm talking more about the certain plot beats that happen throughout, not necessarily how it happens, not necessarily is this real, is this not real, what does reality even mean to a replica. I just wanted to kind of give the kind of like not the beat by beat, but kind of like the overarching narrative, essentially, of some things, at least for me personally, and you can stop me whenever you feel like, oh, you skipped something that was emotionally important to me, then we can definitely do this. I try to put as much in here of things that are immediately apparent through the story, and I try to avoid reading into what are certain things. Is this a metaphor for something? I didn't even, spoiler alert, I didn't even mention anything about the bioresonance of Ariane, for example, or Ariane.
Oh my god, that's all I want to talk about.
Well, that's the thing. In my story, that didn't happen to me. That was not part of my story. I did not really care. It's not that I didn't really care for it. I didn't really read what was happening to be her doing.
Bioresonant, yeah.
So I was just going to go through a little bit more of a, I guess, a stale, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Whether who, why, and where, who and why, or maybe just why.
I think breaking down some quote unquote facts in the story is a good place to kind of open up some conversation.
Okay, so here's a bit of the story. Like we were saying, a bit ambiguous. Specifically because Elster is an unreliable narrator. We learn little by little throughout the game that replicas are prone to hallucinations and losing their memory.
Misrememberings.
Yep, misremembering and all these different things. This is something that replicas all go through towards the end of their shelf life, so to speak, their expiration date, if you, for lack of a better word. So we're gonna be summarizing the story, but when we say summarizing the story, we're just gonna say things that happen, whether why they happen, if it really did happen, if it was all in Elster's memories. That's up to the player to decide. So the general idea is you crash land, and you crash land in this one mining facility. You are looking for the pilot of the ship where you crash landed, Ariane, who is missing, and you don't remember why, but you remember, or at first you don't remember why. Eventually you remember that you have a promise that you need to keep, and so you need to find Ariane to fulfill that promise. What that promise is, we are not told, at least at this point in time. Other than that, everything else in the game is a showcase of vibes based, rather than actually plot driven narrative. So as you go down through this mine, you eventually do find where Ariane is, and even though you've gone through these trials and tribulations, you succumb to your injuries before you actually see her. You find that, oh, she's in that other room, I'm gonna go get her, and you actually, there's a scene where you are trying to open the door and your arms rip off your body and you die, and that is the end of the game. The credits roll. The main menu changes from, usually there is this not Ariane, Elster's eyes following your mouse as you select a choice. Now you see a blank stare of her eye staring into nothingness because she is dead. Or so you think. I don't know about you, Jason, but at least me personally, when I got to that ending, I was angry because I was like, I'm enjoying this game so much. How dare you have such a dud of an ending? I refuse. I refuse to believe this is the ending. So I immediately clicked begin, and lo and behold, it isn't the ending. Elster wakes up in a new facility, and it is the facility you learn that is where Ariane spent her teenage years. We don't know much of why you're here, what's actually happening. Again, this is something that Elster wasn't here in real life as far as we know. So why is she here in the teenage life of Ariane? And so we learned that Ariane was kind of a free spirit. She grows up in this new state that is very much a sort of, it's pretty much kind of like a communist type idea of every person lives for the state controls everything, and you are trying to do your best to fulfill your duty to the state. And when somebody like Ariane, who was taught from childhood to be a free spirit, to draw paint, to make paintings, read books, and all these different things, she does not vibe well with this government. So she is bullied a lot in her childhood, as far as we know, and she eventually is sent to a labor camp to essentially, hey, everybody here has obligatory military duty. They send her through military, and eventually they say, hey, your duty is going to be in this labor camp. It's really crappy. Not many people like to be here. This is like the dredge of society. This is where everybody who can't fit in or can't do well is sent here. So you're about to be sent here, or Ariane is about to be sent here, or Ariane. Do you know if how it's actually supposed to be?
I pronounced it Ariane.
Ariane, okay. So you are here, and Ariane, in one of the trips on a subway, she sees a poster for something called the Penrose Program, which is a scouting mission where they select certain people to go out into space to scout for other habitable planets. Because in this story, the planets, the whole solar system is actually already colonized. So they're looking for, are there any other planets beyond that? So Ariane applies and is selected. She is sent off on her way. She is given a replica unit, which we learn is going to be Elster. And she loves her time on board. She can read whatever she wants, listen to any music, watch anything she wants. She's pretty much as far away from the government as she can be. Little by little, she realizes that this is very lonely. As much freedom as she has, she's still very much confined to her ship, floating out into space. And she slowly commences to have a platonic relationship with Elster, which eventually blooms into actually romantic love between Elster and Ariane. After some time, we learn the truth of the scouting mission, which is this is a one-way ticket. Essentially, you either find a habitable planet and you are the first colonizer of the habitable planet. You start growing a garden and everything and send information back. But more likely than not, you won't find anywhere, and that's it. You're going to die on that ship. There is no way to get back home. You are 3,000 cycles away. Your rations are going down. At this point, you have taken so much radioactivity that your body functions are going to start to fail anytime now. So the final message that she receives from HQ is essentially a set of instructions or suggestions on how to pass on, how to die, because it is more painful to try and survive on the ship than it is to just die. Ariane and Elster decide that their love is going to push them through. They decide that they're going to struggle as much as they can. And so as time goes on, Ariane finds herself sleeping in the cryo chamber more and more. She is more of her body is coming to radiation sickness. And Ariane, and this is how we learn finally the promise at the very towards the end of the game, we learn that the promise is Ariane asks Elster, hey, if Elster is ever fading, Elster, if you're ever feel like you're gonna die or anything like that, if I'm ever in such a state where it is so painful that I cannot be, please kill me. Please euthanize me. Please end me so that way I can pass on peacefully and not have to suffer more, both either without you or in just a torturous state of pain. And from here, the game actually has multiple endings, and this is something that is very interesting to me. We already talked about the fake ending, which the the developer actually has a funny story about it. We can talk about a little bit later. But there are 4 endings. One of them is called Leave. This one is Elster finds the Penrose ship, but can't bring herself to see Ariane face to face and decides to just leave and succumbs to her illness, to her injuries, and just dies without seeing Ariane. There's Promise, which Elster does find Ariane and fulfills her promise and essentially euthanizes Ariane. There's Memory, which is Elster finds Ariane. This one is actually kind of tough to really interesting ending. Elster finds Ariane, but Ariane has succumbed so much to the radiation poisoning that she has lost her memory and all memory of Elster. So she says, I'm sorry, I just don't know who you are. Elster says, oh, okay, that's fine. Can I sleep next to you? And Elster dies next to Ariane. And then the final ending, which is we can talk about why it's weird later. It's called Lily. This one is a bit more esoteric in that you don't find Ariane, you find these 6 pillars, which are metaphors for other characters throughout the story.
Yes.
You put a flower on top of a beam and you collapse and die there. That one requires a little bit more understanding. I think that I don't know if you have a little bit more context for that one. But before we get into all that, what ending did you get?
I got Promise.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really expect there to be multiple endings. I was pretty shocked to see that when the ending credits rolled and I got my metric breakdown of how I played the game, that it also shows me which ending I got, which I thought was pretty incredible. The most of the time that I'm used to multiple ending to style games, I'm thinking about. I think a lot about games like the Persona series or the SMT series, Shin Megami Tensei, where there's like usually 3 endings in those games, sometimes more, sometimes less, and they tend to be very much like evil, true, neutral, good, and then if there's sometimes there's like medium bad and medium good in those, and they tend to be tied to hyper specific series of choices. They tend to be very, very, very difficult to obtain differently between one another. Like most people get funneled into one because it's about making correct choices along the way to achieve an ending in a game that usually has a designed, quote unquote, good ending or true ending or canonical ending, yada, yada. So I got the promise ending.
I got the promise ending too, and to the point that Jason is talking about, just to give you kind of a peek behind the curtain as to how the game decides which ending you get. I don't believe there's actually any choices that you make. Like, there's no dialogue choices in this game.
There's none.
The way that it decides what you get is that there is a point system in the background, and certain endings have different points of different things. For example, if you finish the game in less than 8 hours, you get a point towards leave. If you get points towards, if you finish the game in 8 to 12 hours, a point towards promise. And if it's 12 or more, you get a point towards memory. Depending on how do you face monsters. If you kill a bunch of monsters, that's points towards promise. How long are you in menus is one of the ones that it counts. How long are you standing still is something else that it counts. It's a lot of very different things that the designer said that we wanted to match the ending with play style so that way if we can kind of garner some information as to how you play the game, we kind of can feel like which ending would be more good for you. So the idea is, if you're not moving around, if you're not killing too many people or anything like that, okay, so you're more of a pacifist while playing the game. Okay, so I think that this is the ending that most pacifists would like to get. Oh, you're this person that you're very emotional and very like shooting everything and you're barging ahead as quickly as possible. Okay, then you are definitely somebody who wants to find Ariana, wants to fulfill your promise, so you're gonna be fulfilling your promise. You're taking too long. Oh my gosh, you're taking so much time and everything. Well, the radiation poisoning is going to affect her. And it's not that is the bad ending. In fact, Yuri once tweeted, I'll read the tweet directly. I was watching some streams of Signalis recently, and I saw towards the end, many people in the chat would tell the streamer they got the good, in quotes, or bad, in quotes, ending. Whenever I see this, I get a bit sad. They were asked about what do they mean about this tweet, and Yuri Stern gave a little bit more of information. They say, it might have been phrased poorly, but my tweet was really only meant to be an observation on the dynamic of telling first-time players how to feel about their ending. We were always aware that a lot of people would grade endings based on classic good-bad scale. So we tried to balance the representation of each story outcome a little based on this expectation. But I think we might have overdone it in some cases. I disagree. I think they did a great job. I don't think they overdid it. Barbara Whitman also says, endings are determined based on players' overall playstyle. It was not our intention that players replay the game to try to get another ending. Rather, we wanted for each player to get an ending that fits their playstyle.
I think I want to stop you there because I think this is brilliant. And this is something that games that have multiple endings, I think, use them more as a gimmick and than as a storytelling vehicle or mechanic. And the fact that Signalis takes into consideration how you played the game down to, are you standing still? Are you moving? Are you running? Are you trying to end it as quickly as possible? Yada, yada. And tries to tie that play style towards an emotional standpoint in the game, I think is incredible. And I think that even as and then going so far as to say, we don't want you to beat this game. Like, it has multiple endings, not because you're supposed to see all the endings, but because we just want to make sure that you get the right one, I think is very indicative that Barbara Whitman and Yuri Stern are particularly aware of video games as a storytelling medium in ways that I think a lot of other designers and developers today maybe aren't quite there yet or haven't been there yet. And I'm still consistently impressed with this idea that you get the ending that you get based on the way that you played, which is honestly very similar to how you played Undertale, which had its own repercussions, right? And then they went so far as to say, well, tell you what, if you are going to play through the game for another ending, we're going to actually make you work for the most obtuse ending possible.
Which is the Lily ending.
Which is the Lily ending. And the Lily ending requires you to exit the game and basically take data from the game and run it through external sources to solve puzzles. And I think part of this ties into the idea that because you have a fixed camera angle game where you have extremely authored perspectives, the puzzles revolve around you generally finding items, putting them in things, and then solving a puzzle. Mm-hmm. And what that leads to is, if you miss something, you probably didn't click on something in a room. And so if you think that you can just go through every screen in the game and just click on every square pixel and just solve and then find this mysterious hidden ending, that will not work whatsoever. And I think it's really, really important to note that they understand that they have this extremely doctored and authored perspective of how to tell the story in the game, and then they go as far as they do to undermine it by saying there is one more thing to do, and I think every player in the game will see it, and we will have multiple we will kind of point at it, but unless you're really dedicated, it's not for you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's pretty interesting, and I don't want to bury the lead. So in the Lily ending, you get to the end of the game, and right before the very ending of the game, you're in Ariane's room, like her childhood room in the radio tower. And on the desk is the radio and some books and some posters. And at the very beginning of the game is a copy of a book called The King in Yellow. And at the very end of the game is a copy of the book called The King in Yellow. And it will have seals on it, basically locking the book down. And depending on how you played the game will determine if you've unlocked all the seals and can open the book. And that will change your ending. That kind of is like a deciding factor in your ending. However, in that room as well is a safe, and it is chained up with 3 locks, and you can open it if you've collected 3 keys specifically for those locks, and you've carried them throughout the game. And the only way to find those keys is to use your radio module in very specific rooms at very specific points in the game when there are really weird frequencies that don't match the rest of the game. And that is going to lead me into this whole idea of a radio module in the game. And that's something that really stood out to me as very uniquely Signalis, and something that really aided in sort of the horror and terror of the game. And at one point, you early on are solving puzzles, and one of the puzzles gives you a big hexagonal metal plate, and in solving the puzzle that's tied to I believe it's the Plate of Eternity, you are transported in this flashback to a radio tower on the planet Rotfront. Rotfront is the planet that Ariane's originally from, and you are at this sort of remote radio tower in the mountains, and that is where she grew up with her mother. And they lived alone. They did not have to deal with the state or the government or any sort of overbearing oppression or anything like that. They just lived their lives reading books and listening to the radio and managing her mother's job, basically. And you go through this flashback It is fully in first person, which is one of the most incredible magic tricks of Signalis, is that it is a single perspective, fixed camera angle game until something really weird happens where if you get into an elevator, it will go to first person mode. If you go into a flashback, like to this radio tower, you will enter first person mode and you can walk through a space very slowly, very creepily in from a first person perspective camera, which I think is so unsettling and so smart just from a storytelling and a tension building perspective that I'm still in awe of it. And long story short, you go through the radio tower and you get a module that allows you to, as a cyborg, as a replica, tune to different frequencies and pick up different frequencies. This serves multiple purposes, both in puzzle solving throughout the game, and it also has a combat function when you fight a particular another replica that is
the Colibri unit.
The Colibri units, yes. Not just a font. Good listener, dear listener. It is also a horrible psychic beast. And yeah, I just think that tying this very special fourth ending to scoping through the game with your radio, listening for the weirdest frequencies, recording the frequency, going on the internet to figure out what it means, and then going to a radio frequency to television signal converter and converting the frequency into an image is fucking crazy. That's just... Yeah. That's so many layers deeper than I had ever anticipated.
It is bordering on ARG territory, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It reminds me. Well, I'm not going to say what other game it reminds me of because that might be spoilers for that game. I will instead say it reminds me of the Metal Gear Solid series and having the comm where
I know what you're talking about.
You can set the frequency in the Metal Gear Solid series, and some of them do have hidden information and some stuff to talk to from here and there. Something that I wanted to talk about what you just said, you mentioned this flashback and getting this item in this flashback that you can then use in the present day, and this serves towards, I'm not gonna bury the lead yet, but this does serve to tell the player there's something weird going on here. There's multiple times where you seemingly go into a flashback and carry an item from that flashback onto the present day, and that happens like 3 times, and that has some level of implication as to, wait, what is going on here? What is real? Did that just happen? Or did I find it somewhere and my memory got jumbled up and I thought I found it back then? What is going on? And a lot of things happened there, which made my experience of my understanding of the story be very different. One last thing about the endings, or not last thing, if you want to talk about another thing, is I want to go back to the 5th ending. Jason, you didn't talk about the 5th ending. The most important.
Oh, the fake ending?
The fake ending. That's the most important ending, right? It's the first one. It's the one that most people will see. Because Yuri Stern actually talked about it. They were asked, why did you put this fake ending in the story? And this is what they had to say. To be honest, I didn't expect many players to even reach that ending. It's a bit of a strange habit, perhaps, but I don't finish most of the games I play, even the ones I enjoy a lot. So in a way, that ending was my way of trying to make sure people like me get to see an ending even if they usually don't finish games. That way, they can stop if they've had enough. What Yuri, a lovely person.
Yuri, thank you so much, because I am just like you. I do not finish most of the games that I play. I love so many games, and I wish more of them had like
fake endings.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Dragon Ball Z. Yeah, I think that's really incredible, and yeah, I think having this 5th ending, or this first ending, or however you want to cut it, is pretty brilliant, just from the perspective of telling a story that you want to tell, and creating understanding and making meaning from the story that you want to make. And I don't want to make Signalis about this idea of meaning making in an inherently absurd world. I think that argument, that reading can be made here. I don't think that's necessarily what's going on, because this isn't a game, this isn't a story that I think is particularly interested in is it real, is it not real, have we made meaning in this crazy place? Like, this isn't like an Inception or a Shutter Island or an Existence, to quote Cronenberg from earlier. It's a story that's really about tragedy and love, and how these very human, these very intense connections can echo through space and through time, and can leave these scars, these emotional craters in our psyches, and it can have these sort of physical effects. So I mean, personally, for me, Fran, I didn't take a lot of this game as real. I didn't interpret a lot of what we were playing through as the real world. Like, we were on Sierpinski, we were on Rotfront, we were in nowhere. Like, I kind of experienced a lot. The way I read the game, I guess, to kind of jump into that space, is that I really read Signalis as the experience of Ariane being a very powerful bioresonant woman. So if you didn't play that far into the game, bioresonance is this poorly understood in-universe superpower almost. It's basically some form of like telekinesis and telepathy, sort of writ large, and it's really shaped the world of Signalis, and it kind of allows you to like physically use your mind to mentally and psychically shape the world in a physical way, to have like a real effect on it. And so I read the game as Ariane being a very powerfully bioresonant young woman who is struggling with her identity and struggling with her position and her perspective as a young woman, trying to sort of figure out how she identifies and what she can do, and what position, what place she has in this world. And in doing so, she's, I think, trying to solve and understand herself. A very sort of traditional coming of age Bildungsroman sort of story. And when she leaves, I think everything you said is in her story is factually true. When she leaves on the Penrose program with Elster on board, and she falls in love with Elster, and after 3,000 cycles or 5,000 cycles or whatever it is, after 8 years, the ship starts to break down, the coolant system leaks radiation, and she starts to die of radiation poisoning. Ariane is cryogenically frozen by Elster, and the sort of tragic loss and terror of death that she experiences in this living, unliving decay space causes this bioresonant sort of psychic lashing out. And Elster, being the one that is connected with her, is in some ways like psychically resonant with that. And so she is kind of walking through Ariane's experiences, and she's trying to walk through the terror and the shame and the fear and the agony of being on your deathbed, but finding the person you love, but not being able to exactly be with them, and knowing that you're dying, but having no control over it, and physically watching and feeling yourself decay slowly over time in the ways in which that, only radiation poisoning, only radiation sickness can really do, right? In that really true cellular degradation that it creates and it causes. And so I choose to read it that way, as a very psychically told story, because it neatly answers anytime something weird happens in the story. It's because it's not exactly real.
Yeah.
I think that you can read the story that bioresonance is powerful enough to psychically affect reality. And I think that's very reasonable. And for a while, that's kind of how I chose to cut it up. But for me, it's I come back to the King in Yellow a lot, and I wanna let you jump in before I go down that fucking rabbit
Yeah.
hole. But it's really resonant, pun intended, for me to see how, especially in the promise ending, and this is certainly coloring my reading, right? Is the
Yeah.
fact that I got the
Yeah.
promise ending. I did not play for any other endings. I only know about them through some videos that I watched after the fact. And getting the promise ending, I mean, of course, I mean, what's harder? What's harder to do than pulling the plug on your loved one? You know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to put content warnings at the beginning of this episode.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a note for that. But and I can't imagine anything more difficult than that. And so of course it's going to be this horrible, fleshy, deadly just experience to go through Signalis, because at the end of the day, it's really just a story about how do we let go of the ones that we love the most.
Yeah.
And I think depending on the ending you get, it's either you take them there yourself, you leave them there to die, or you waited too long and you weren't able, and you weren't able to save them the way that you wanted to. So I mean, that's for me how I read it.
Yeah.
I have more to get into on the King in Yellow, on Alina Co, on the E2 sisters. And I have lots of interesting stuff to dig in if we get to it. But what about you? How did you sort of read Signalis?
My read on Signalis is a lot more poignant in that it's a lot less breadth. You mentioned about the King in Yellow and the E2 sisters and all these things. And honestly, I did not really read too much into everything that is going on. I hyper focused on Elster and Ariane and didn't really give much thought as to what the other characters are in this story. For me, when I was playing this story, there's a few things that jumped out to me that made me conclude what I'm about to say. One thing is that we haven't mentioned this, but the way that the replica is created is that they take a neural signature, is what they call it, of a human who is near their death, but has been an exemplary citizen of the state, whether it be through their milestones or whether it be just because they were a really good person or anything like that. They take them. They essentially copy their neural signature. We do not know what does that mean for the original, if it means destroying their brain. All we know is that as part of this process, the state itself tries to erase as much information about you as a person. They delete your medical history. They destroy all your pictures. They try to make you disappear, essentially. And what we know is that through the degradation of the replica that we know about, they slowly start to remember memories that it doesn't belong to the replica, belongs to the original person that the neural signature was made from. And we know that you are more prone to this to happen to you the more copies away you are from the original. So the first copy replica, but then you are a copy of a copy, then you are a copy of a copy, then you are so on and so forth. So that was thing number one, that whole idea of having memories that don't belong to you, that might belong to you, having memories that belong to other people, but you have taken them as your own, was a big thing that was mentioned to me, that popped out to me. The second thing that popped out to me was the topic of cycles. So the fact that things repeat themselves, that this isn't the first time this has happened. This is happening over and over and over again. So to me, my reading of the story was that this is the final throes of what happens to a replica when they die. There isn't much information in the game. There's a lot of information, well, not a lot of information, but there's quite a bit of information as to how replicas are made, but never do they ever say how do you destroy a replica? What happens to a destroyed replica? Once they pass their shelf life and you're replaced, what do we do with them? Do you just kill them? What happens? And to me, my reading was that this is the game that you are playing are essentially a replica is kind of experience. Elster is experiencing the flash before her eyes. She is re-experiencing all her memories, all the memories of the person that her copy was from, all the memories that Ariane had imbued in her as they had this romantic relationship, telling her about her stories in Lang and about her mom and all these things. And she is pretty much just in this cycle, in this loop. She is dying over and over and over again until eventually the lights go out. And that's how I read it. I read it as, at the end of my story, Promise, you kill Ariane, and then you just lay beside her and you kind of stare into nothing, and that is it. The credits open, and if you were to replay the game, then you are entering another cycle of her remembering all these things in the wrong order, and the things that aren't physically possible are being possible. Right. This thing, the flesh, the monsters that are happening is more of the radiation poisoning that is affecting you, that is affecting your memories in such a way. They are manifest. The cancer that is entering your body may manifest in your memories. So you might not have remembered the flesh being there, but now that the flesh is in your body, you are remembering this distortion of reality. And that's how I read it. I read it as, I did not read the first time through. I know that the so quote unquote objective or well accepted is that there is some level of bioresonance with Ariane. But for me, when I first did it, that did not even enter the equation for me. I did not even think, oh, Ariane is bioresonant and might be manipulating reality in such a way that this is happening. I read it as, this is all fake. If not fake, this is all things that have already happened and distortions of memories that have already happened, and you're just reliving that memory. Ending was so powerful. So thinking about death, about what do you do, love in the face of death, essentially. What does that mean? How do you tackle it? How do you move on from it? Or is it even possible to move on from it? I'm not 100% sure if this is too much for me rambling at this point, but I am somebody who has gone through a medical procedure. Something happened to me when I was 25 years old that pretty much the doctors told me you should start saying your goodbyes just in case if you don't make it. Like, this is how dire we're talking about here. And some of the most emotional for me moments of love and talking to your loved ones before you might die is the different reactions that you get from different people. My mom got angry at me. Lauren didn't even know what, she had not been told everything, and I didn't want to tell her. And so having gone through something like that and knowing that it is the human experience to kind of go through that again eventually really impacted me in such a way, in such a beautiful way that I've only, I think, cried like once or twice in games, and this is one of them.
Right.
And yeah, it was a rough ending from how much it impacted me and affected me. So yeah, I don't want to get I don't want to get much deeper into all that. But essentially, this all this to say is that just what we've been saying over and over again, that I don't think that the script of this story really matters at all. This the actual story that Yuri and Barbara both say as much, where they are not interested in you following the script that they have laid before you. They want you to have your own experience, your own understanding. They don't want you to be influenced by what is a good ending, a bad ending. They just want you to experience it. They made this piece of art and they want you to experience it to its fullest without being influenced by anything else. And I think that is a very powerful thing. And there's so much that we have not talked about yet. Some of the stuff that we will talk about, but this game has a lot to offer. A lot to offer. What affected me personally might not be what affects you personally. We haven't talked. We might talk in a bit about Faulkner, about the administrator. What do they mean? The Itu sisters, which to me was pretty much just two side characters that I didn't care about at all, but actually do have some implications to other people. I don't want to ramble too much further. I want to give you your opportunity to impart some beautiful knowledge on the King in Yellow.
Well, thank you for sharing all that, Fran. I know it's not easy to talk about, and I can certainly see so much of what happens in Signalis being something that ties closely to you. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I know it's certainly not an easy thing to talk about or experience here again. And I take your point quite seriously on how the experience, the plot, the layout of the game itself is rather unimportant versus your own personal experience, dear listener, to Signalis and what it's telling you. And I think that, to your point, if you want to fundamentally sit down and peel every inch of this game apart and explore the E2 sisters and Adler and Falca and what all these things mean and the Empress, like I'll be honest, I'm not terribly interested in getting into that in this podcast episode. Yeah. I think that there are better videos on YouTube, and I will certainly link the wonderful one that I watched. And I know you watched a great one as well, and I'll link those in the show notes. But I mean, sort of peeling back what was real, what wasn't real. Are you Lilith E2? Are you, like, all of this stuff? Like, this is all in the game. You can freeze frame different cutscenes to try and peel stuff apart, and I think that's powerful and that's wonderful, and the mystery of that can be very satisfying if that's the kind of gamer, if that's the kind of person you are, you're into that. I welcome you to it because I think there's quite a bit that you can get into, but I think that emotionally it's a psychically powerful game, and that's kind of the up and down of it for me. I do, before we get right into my little piece on the King in Yellow, I want to touch quickly on an old piece of literary criticism I haven't thought about in a while, but when I was listening to you talk about some of the design features earlier in the first part of the episode, it struck me that John Keats, famous poet from the 1800s, wrote often about this idea of sublimity, ambiguity, and beauty. And Keats coined a term called negative capability, and this is I'm going to put on my hat, my English major cap here. And the short and long of negative capability is the ability to hold your mind in a state of exception without impatience, or the ability to hold your mind in a place of uncertainty and a place of intellectual confusion without the frustration, without the desire and need to philosophically determine certainty. So all that is to say that negative capability is Keats's idea to try to understand that beauty is in ambiguity. It's sort of the opposite of the devil is in the details, right? It's this idea that just the experience, just the feeling of something, like being okay with not understanding something fully, is a sort of sublime beauty and perfection in and of itself. And when I use the phrase sublime, I'm using it a little bit more classically in the sense that it refers to an experience of awe, of beauty that is so overwhelming, that is so intense that it borders somewhere between wondrous and horrifying, somewhere between beautiful and terror. And that is the idea of sublimity. You might think of it in the story of the birth of Dionysus, wherein in the story of Dionysus, his mother is human, and I believe she's human. She might be a half god, but I'll say that she's human. And Dionysus's father is Zeus, and long story short, Zeus tells the woman that he's Zeus, and she says, well, if you're the father of my child, I want to see you. And he's like, you can't see me, because if you see me in my full glory and my full potential, you'll die. And she's like, I don't care, I want to see you anyway. And so he reveals himself in his sublime, overwhelming godliness, and she melts. She literally melts, and he reaches into her womb and pulls Dionysus from it. And this is a classic Greek mythology. And so this idea of sublimity, I think, is really important to both The King in Yellow, but moreover, it is important to Signalis, because Signalis is a game that is really written in this intense focus on ambiguity, mystery, and being okay with it. Like it wants you to be okay with not understanding stuff. And I think it's intentionally obtuse, and it is intentionally opaque for this reason, right? Like there's no story dump. There's no logic given to you about what is happening in Signalis. Any character that is speaking to you directly, Adler, the administrator of Sierpinski, does this. He talks to you directly a couple times. Falca will talk to you quite a few times at the end of the game as well. These experiences and the information that you get from them is all wrapped in understanding that these characters, Adler and Falca, and I believe Itu, they all know what the fuck is going on at least 10 times more than you do, and they still don't know what's going on. So the idea in your interpretation that it is sort of the last moments of your life fleeting in front of you as they cycle, I think is apt, just as any other reading, because nothing is given to you. You get pieces of the story, right? You get these pieces of the puzzle where you get notes from the government about what replicants or what replicas are, and how to keep them happy, and what fetish objects different models prefer, and
by
why.
Fetish objects, guys, it's not sexual. It's more fetish objects, as in what essentially kind of like a little kid with a teddy bear. Kind of like, what is their like little item that they like to hold or cling on to kind of to keep themselves distracted, so to speak.
It's fetish in the anthropological use,
yes,
not in the more modern use. It's the human attribution of special powers or value onto an object, to use the actual definition of fetishism. So a fetish object for Adler, who is the administrator, which is short for administration unit, right, is shifting and changing. Like, he needs to just like fetishize different objects. It's a book, it's a journal, it's a pen that he steals from a guy in the middle of the story. And for the Calibri units, they need to have access to a library. So like, these facilities have libraries. And so there's all these little things, very much like a Souls-like, very much in a FromSoft sort of style, that you can get pieces of this world and pieces of the story given to you. And I think that storytelling method is just really powerful.
Yeah.
And it always has a lot of sort of wonder associated with it on part of the player, but also on part of the writer on the author for creating this desire to wonder more.
I like the that the fetish object for the Elster units were mirrors, because
Yes.
there's when I learned, so you don't learn what Elster's fetish item, you don't even learn about fetish items until like halfway through the game, where they tell you a little bit more about the shelf life of them, why they need fetish objects. The reason they need it is because the more that they focus on, not like, the more that they become unsync with who their neural signature was from, the more they kind of become desynced from their neural signature, and they start remembering things that are from the original person and all these different things. So there's a few things that you're supposed to do with replicas, so that way they can keep their essentially their not their humanity, but their identity,
to keep them from going into persona degradation.
Yeah, exactly.
In the terms of the text of the story.
Yes, and it's really cool because you see a lot of mirrors throughout the game, and the Elster sleeping pods and all these different things. And later on, you learn, oh, the fetish object is this because they are very proper and they really need to make sure that they look good and their hair is good and all these things. So their fetish object is mirrors. So that way they can see themselves and identify themselves. Really cool stuff. really cool.
The fetish object being a mirror is so interesting because in the absence, and I kind of want to get into this idea of absence too, but in the absence of a mirror, the Elster unit sort of in its persona degradation, as it starts to remember its former self, it starts to experience intense dysphoria, and it starts to experience the self-esteem issues, and basically the whole reason for these fetish objects, right? The whole reason for maintaining persona integration for these replicas is to keep them working better.
Yeah.
They are just a slave population. These replicas serve no other purpose whatsoever other than to fill out functions. Some of them are miners. They're called Mina. Some of them are administrator units. They're called Adler. Some of them are godlike commanders of entire planets or colonies. They're called Falca, which is German for falcon.
Yeah. All of them are, by the way, based on birds.
Yes.
Yeah. Elster is owl. Yule is
Yule is owl. Elster is
magpie. Magpie, obviously, because the magpie is the song. There is the song that
it's the song that plays throughout the
game.
Throughout the game, yeah. But also, she picks up all the items in the game.
Yeah.
Which is what magpies do. You're always picking up this shiny object.
I didn't think about that, actually. That's great.
Yeah, you're a magpie in the game. So, of course, Elster's the magpie.
Oh, that's cute. That's cute.
Yeah.
Speaking of magpie, when you play that magpie song for the first time, did you get chills?
Yes. It was really, really satisfying.
So when you turn on the game and you're in the main menu, the main theme of, I guess, what you can consider maybe the main theme of Signalis starts playing, and it goes a little bit like this. This is for you, Jason, to add in the sound effect.
Yeah,
right
I got
there.
you. Don't worry.
I
got you.
And so you're like, oh, that's like some kind of signal, some kind of whatever. You don't give too much thought of it. It's just music. And then whenever you are playing the game, there's a point in the game where you need to take these sound sequences and replay them through your radio frequency to kind of play that music on a lockbox, and the lockbox opens. And one of them is called Magpie. And you're like, oh, what's this? And then all of a sudden it starts playing the same music as in the main menu. And you get chills, oh, that sound is so creepy. And so ooh, I hope I don't need to listen to that again. And then that is the song you have to play a lot to unlock the thing. And you're like, ooh, boy, that's so...
It's really cool use of leitmotif throughout the game, and there's just a lot of little sequences and little moments in this game where I'm just like constantly surprised by like what they're doing. You know me by now. I'm the kind of guy who's I'm gonna read every single piece of text in the game. I'm gonna read everything in any glossary you give me. And so I was eating good in this one, and
You'll be happy to know. You'll be happy to know that I read all of it too.
Okay,
I am not
good.
usually that type of person, but this one got me hooked, and I was reading every single little piece, a morsel of information that I could read.
Yeah, well, next I'll get you reading the entire glossary and the whole encyclopedia and the Mass Effect series.
Oh,
but no, it's just a great way to tell a story, and like I said, it allows you to interact with as much of the story as you want to, which I think is really what they're doing. They're doing the best in Signalis. I think I want to touch on. There's so much we could talk about, and I really think the answer is like whatever you feel like you got out of this game is so special. I do want to touch on the King in Yellow because that's something that I tied into pretty closely.
If you don't mind, can I speak of something of a design thing? Because I think that the King of Yellow is going to be kind of like the big final thesis.
In a way, yeah. I would love for you to talk about design though, and tie us back to that.
Yeah, because obviously we have talked a lot about all these different things and all these design story elements, and I do really want to but I do want to let people know it's not just story. This game knocks it out of the park in some really weird, creepy, good design choices. I'm going to be talking about, Jason, do you know about the 180 rule?
No, tell me about the 180 rule.
So 180 rule is traditionally a cinematography rule. It essentially tells you where your camera can be situated in a scene. It is best explained with an example. And so imagine a dialogue scene where you have two characters talking to each other, right? You draw a line between the two that intersects those two characters, and your camera from the beginning to the end of the scene cannot cross that line. You can revolve it around the speakers all you want, 180 degrees around the subjects, but you cannot cross that line. The reason is that, so if you think about it, what does this allows us to do? It allows the audience to very easily understand where the subjects are in relation to the environment. So you see a character looking towards the left, and then the other character is looking towards their right. And you don't cross the camera, you know, okay, that character is on the left, that character is on the right, and they are talking to each other, and I'm not confused about where they are situated in this environment. Problem if you break the 180 rule, you have one character looking to the left talking, you break the 180 rule, and now you have another character, the other character talking to the left as well. Now you're like, wait, is one looking away from the other character? Are they actually looking at each other? This is something that in cinematography is a huge thing, the 180 rule. It is why a lot of the the two-shot composition for dialogue is such a normal use, is because it follows the 180 rule. But even if you go crazy with it and you move the camera around and you move it, you always make sure that your two subjects draw a line and you make sure the camera never crosses that line. Video games have a similar thing. What I am coining, I'm not coining it, but what I am kind of giving it the same level of importance, which is the 180 rule. It happens all the time. You play these old games, you open the door, your character goes through the door, and the camera immediately goes from behind you, fades out, then fades in on the new room, and the camera is now in front of you. And you accidentally keep on pressing the analog stick forward, because the camera changed directions, you now go back into the room that you just came from. That is breaking the 180 rule. That is no good. No bueno.
Jumping the line, right?
You are jumping the line. You are breaking in, you're disorienting the audience to the point that they do not understand how the subject exists in the environment.
Okay.
So
I'm pretty interested now. I
this
want
is
to. Let me see where you're gonna take me.
so this is where I'm gonna take you. Signalis does a really good job at following the 180 rule.
Yes, I agree
you go
with
through
that.
one room and you come out the other room. So you exit a room from the left, exit the room to the left, and the next room that you enter it from the right. So that way there's a through line of you're moving left and you continue moving left. It does a great job. The map is set up. I can see you smiling because I know what you're
exactly
going. I know where you know where I'm going with this. They do an amazing job at this, and then they break it in the most fracking genius giga brain. Holy shit! How do these people have a 10,000 IQ level? They start breaking the rule once you enter nowhere. Nowhere is a level in Signalis where we've made allusions to this thing called the flesh, and they're kind of like the main enemies, so to speak. They take over the bodies of other replicas. They are very Cronenberg, as Jason was saying. They're kind of like this amorphous, fleshy thing that just continues growing over time, and they are the main source of horror in this game. There is one part in this game where you enter the flesh, where there is a gaping hole of flesh. Disgusting, and that is the only way forward, and by golly, you're gonna find Ariane, and that's the only way to go, so I'm gonna go in there. And so I want you to know,
I did everything and anything I possibly could to avoid jumping down that hole, that fleshy, wet hole. And I was messaging you. I was messaging you while I was in nowhere exploring, and I was like, Fran, I have nothing left to do but go down this horrible, horrible hole. I'm gonna take all of the. I think we probably have the Discord message where I said to you, "This is what I'm taking. I hope it's enough." And what did I say?
It's not enough.
I said, "Oh my God, I was wrong."
So you go in there, and it is definitely the most, not just disgusting, but not necessarily even the scariest part, because it does enter the realm of, now we are in this like Saw-like trap of like everything is horror. It's like you've entered a haunted house where everything is scary, and
everything's meat.
Everything is meat except for some metal, but most things are meat and rust and disgusting. And the reason I bring this up is because in nowhere, reality is broken down, and the game shows you very well by breaking this 180 rule. You enter through the left, and all of a sudden, the next scene, you're entering down from the top to bottom.
Oh my God, it was so confusing.
You're so confused, you're so lost, you're disoriented, and that is what they wanted to do. Freaking geniuses. And this is the only time they employ it. They always 180 rule, always perfect. They employ it in this section. This, like, essentially, I would say the game probably has kind of like the equivalent of kind of like 3 dungeons, kind of. Essentially, there's 3 major multi-puzzle puzzles, and nowhere is one of them. And this is the one time where they just say, we are breaking the 180 rule. There is no map that you can look at because everything is distorted in such a way that you have no idea. You sometimes leave to the east and you enter through the east as well. It's kind of like the Lost Woods in a way, like in Legend of Zelda. And for me, there is no such thing as an ironclad rule in any artistic endeavor. There's just rules that you should always follow unless you have a really, really good reason not to. And damn it, Yuri and Barbara, you found a really good reason. Because if you had told me before
sacred
this,
cow, right?
Yes, you killed. If you had told me that there was a way to break the 180 rule, and I was like, God damn it, this is so good, I would have been like, man, I can't think of any. It seems very difficult. I don't think you should probably do that. You probably do that. And they're like, nah, hold my beer. I got this. And I wanted to say that because this is one of the many ways that Yuri and Barbara take classic tropes, both from a narrative sense and both from a design sense, and decide we are just going to distort it to make you feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, that there's a boss in Nowhere that's so disgusting and overwhelming, and like the boss is like unkillable. I used every ammo, every bullet I had, and I was panicking because I was no longer finding ammo. Fucked up that they put ammo in that section too, just so that you can spend it all. It's crazy. Like, Nowhere is really interesting to point out because you also only ever play through Nowhere in your in the first section of the game before the fake ending.
Yep.
So you never go back to Nowhere in the following endings. And notably at the beginning of the first section of the game, when you're at Sierpinski, and in the second section of the game when you wake up and you're in Rotfront, exploring that, like you mentioned with the fetish objects being mirrors, it's Elster coming to, staring at herself in a bathroom mirror, right?
Yeah.
And like trying to center herself. And so I believe notably there's no mirrors in Nowhere. I'm
Good
almost
point.
positive. I'm almost positive there's no mirrors in Nowhere. There's no way for you to center yourself. There's no map that you can reference, which becomes like your best tool throughout the course of the game, just for navigating. It doesn't make sense anyway. You have some of the worst fights in terms of just like difficulty in Nowhere, in terms of like miners in rooms with like those weird vacuum heads and like 3 other guys, and there's like a bunch of shit you want to pick up. And then you go into another room, and then there's like 5 dudes plus there's like 5 zombies plus 2 like Calibri units that are just frequency fighting you. It's just like some crazy shit. And so Nowhere's the thing that stood out to me about Nowhere. There's two. There's the red eyes that are sort of wallpapering the room with the dozen TVs, where you pick up, I believe you pick up the wedding ring in this room.
Yeah. And
so that really stood out to me, because the red eye is a very powerful theme, that an image that continues to reoccur throughout the game. So there's that. And then I forget exactly where I wrote it down because I noticed it, but I didn't write down exactly where it was. But when you are in, So when you're in I believe you're either in the mines or you're in Nowhere right before you're in the mines right before Nowhere, or you're in Nowhere. You find some writings, and it's the warnings in the ancient room. Are the same warnings that are famously suggested to be left in front of nuclear waste disposal areas. So the story goes, I used to teach this as a lesson to my college students way back when. So in I believe it was the 70s or the 80s, I forget exactly when, basically a bunch of the greatest scientific minds, some of the greatest minds in the world, philosophers, musicians, artists, politicians, they had this summit, and it was a nuclear waste summit. And the idea was, how do we have nuclear waste that we need to store, right? Like, we all agree that there's a bunch of highly toxic, irradiated things that need to be stored somewhere, because there's nothing, you can't do anything with it, right? You can't fling it into space. You can't burn it. Like, it's toxic. It is permanently toxic for 1,000,000 years, 1,000 years, whatever it is. So the idea is, if something that is irradiated with uranium needs to be stored somewhere to safely degrade during its half-life, and it's going to take over 1,000 years to do it. We know that life 1,000 years ago was very different, but we don't know. But like, we find everything that they did 1,000 years ago super fucking interesting. We tear graves apart, we tear tombs apart, we tear temples apart. We we don't care what they say. If we can read it, we're going to fucking pick it apart. So then the problem becomes 1,000 years from now, when we're all dead and gone and everything that you know and love and understand is no longer the same, and you have a mountain that you have dug out and is full to the brim with millions of pounds of nuclear waste that needs to stay there for another 5,000 years until it is safe. How do you communicate that to humans 1,000 years in the future? What could you possibly do to convince them this is not good? This is not a place to go. So there's writing in the game that is the same writing. A bunch of authors got together and wrote they wrote I guess like a warning to be put on a plaque in like a dozen languages, and it's in the game. I'm gonna see if I can pull it up for you.
Yeah, I'm looking it up as well.
Yeah. So no, it's long-term nuclear waste warnings on Wikipedia if you're looking for it. But the message that they proposed was written as this place is a message and a part of a system of messages. Pay attention to it. Sending this message was important to us. We considered ourselves to be a powerful culture. This is not a place of honor. No highly esteemed deed is commemorated here. Nothing is valued here. What is here was dangerous and repulsive to us. And there's more to it. But those two sentences that I just read there are the sentences that are posted outside. I'm pretty sure it's outside of nowhere, or at least it's in the mines on the way to nowhere. Mm-hmm. And it stood out to me because I remember teaching this lesson about like, how do you possibly, like, what could you possibly do to tell humans 10,000 years in the future, like, that this is not a place of honor. This is a very bad place to be. And so to me, this idea that you're in the mines or you're in nowhere and there's a warning from previous people, from past humans who are trying to tell you that what is in front of you is not good. This is the worst that it could possibly be. And what do?
That is
you fucking go in. You go in, you go deeper, you peel it back, you find the flesh. Like it's like such a great little tidbit. It's like a nice little nugget that Yuri and Barbara have left for us, wherein if you know, right? Like literally, I knew that this is a long-term nuclear waste warning. So a part of me stopped, and like in the video I watched, this was never even mentioned. But to me, I'm like wondering, are we just like humans 10,000 years in the future that are digging up like ancient Earth like waste, and this is just the result of long time exposure to nuclear waste? Is the Empress, who is found, like the image of the Empress is found in nowhere and nowhere else except for one other position in one of the classrooms, I think. Is bioresonance just fucking nuclear waste and radiation? Like, I think for me, when I read this long-term nuclear waste warning and I got to the end of the game properly, I read it as a stand-in for Ariani's and Elster's death by radioactivity on the ship, as this is just like probably a story that was told to Ariani. She probably read it in one of the books that she was obsessed with, right? And so of course it would show up, at least in my reading, in Elster and Ariani's understanding of we're dying because of radioactive poisoning. And so of course there would be a warning in this place of flesh, which is something that is both, the flesh was so interesting to me in Nowhere because it's like, it's like intensely humanizing, but it's deeply dehumanizing at the same time, because all of this meat is a reminder that replicas are human. They are human bodies that are grown and then augmented and then manipulated, because they have meat inside of them that is corruptible by this extraneous source, or this bioresonant source that's turning them into zombies, Like they're not just built robots from scratch. Like there's meat in those shells, just like Ghost in the Shell, right? And yet this flesh that's reminding us that the replicas are humans and that the humans are humans is also dehumanizing us because we're not just we're just meat. We're all just meat for the grinder.
Yeah.
We exist to serve the state. We exist to work, and it doesn't matter if you're Fran or Jason. You're just meat.
I'm sorry. I'm still just reading this message over and over again, and I cannot believe that there hasn't been already like a crap ton of stories where it's
I
just
think it's happened
this is
once
the
before.
main conceit
I feel like there was a
of the
story about
whole.
this.
Like this is creepy. Like if I also looked up what the message is in the game, like in game, and so the way that it works in game is that it is a poster that has been metal poster that has been a bit corroded, so you can't read everything that Jason just read. So only certain words appear, like this place, nothing valued is here, was dangerous and repulsive. Right. Like it isn't all the information; it's just some of the information. And oh my goodness,
It's very creepy.
That's creepy.
If you go really deep into trying to learn about long-term nuclear waste warning messages, 10,000 years in the future, what the American Human Interference Task Force found in 1981, and this has really not really been dealt with quite a bit afterward, except in 93, like 10 years later. Basically what they found was the only way that you could possibly actually keep people out of nuclear waste is to make it culturally repulsive by embedding something in culture. So the suggestion was they genetically augment and breed cats that glow in the dark when there is radioactivity nearby. And then you teach every culture around these places songs and poems and limericks and stories about don't go near glowing cats. It's really bad. You can find the song on the internet. It's a song about don't go near the glowing cats. And the idea being that this is the only way that you could possibly manage to tell a warning to a human 10,000 years in the future is to embed something so desperately, so deeply into culture that it becomes like instinct that you see a glowing cat and you run away. So it's a pretty crazy. That's a whole different rabbit hole to go down if you're interested in it. But I think it's a really cool add to a reading of Signalis.
And I guess there's dear listener, we talked about this, and we have been alluding to the King in Yellow and this other influence. Friggin' Signalis has so many literary media influences, not just in video games when we're talking about, it's very much like Resident Evil or Silent Hill. Like these must be one of the most crazily well-read people, because they put in so many literary references to different things, and most of them went over my head. I was like, that sounds like a book. I probably should know about it, but I am pragmatic and I read math books, not art books. So it's we're not gonna talk all about it. There's so much that we have not talked about. I'm looking up, because since we're talking about all these influences and everything, Yuri Stern actually talked a little bit about that. Waypoint asked, Signalis wears its influences on its sleeves, but looking back on the project now, how successfully do you think it was at forging its own identity separate from those? And Yuri Stern answers, I don't know how to quantify such an identity. A central question of Signalis is, what is the worth of a replica, a copy of a copy? What does it mean to exist primarily in reference to something else? I think that's up to each player to decide for themselves. Does the strength of art lie in how well it pretends to exist in a vacuum? So we are entering metafiction of the game in of itself being kind of like this copy of a copy through all its influence that it carries it. Is it valid? Is it important? Is it art?
Every
And
playthrough is a copy
that
of a
is
copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Elster doesn't have a gestalt basis for her neurological whatever it is, her neurological pattern. The neurological pattern for Elster's by text of the story is they lost the original neurological pattern, which was a woman from the planet Veneta who died in the war, and they lost it. So what is Elster based off of? Elster is based off of an Elster unit in the Penrose program. You're an Elster in the Penrose program. What the fuck do you mean I'm based on an Elster in the Penrose program? This whole story's the whole story is in Ouroboros. It's just consuming itself. It's impossible to solve for that reason.
Which is exactly why I learned.
Absolutely.
Why I read it as cyclical of like, oh yeah, it's just
Adler pushes you down an elevator and you fall. You collapse onto a tower of corpses of Elsters before you. How many times did you go through the cycle before there was enough corpses piled up that you didn't die? 1,000,000, 1,000. I mean, the game's just incredible. I think the amount that we're dodging or talking about the King in Yellow is so appropriate to the King in Yellow. I'm gonna. All right,
I don't know.
I'll break this in,
about
and then
it, so
we'll
please.
probably try to. Maybe we'll wrap up after that, but so
This is
the
it. This
game
is it.
opens
the King
up.
in Yellow. What is it?
And when you leave the ship in your very first playthrough as Elster, and you travel through the snow, through the gate, the very famous gate in the Red Desert is the same gate on the surface of the snowy planet Lang, and you find the hole, and you travel down the hole, and when you get to the bottom of the hole, there's nowhere else to go but into another hole, and so you crawl into that, and where do you end up? Ariane's bedroom. And in Ariane's bedroom, you find a number of you find the radio, books, a poster, you find a door, and you find a copy of Chambers's The King in Yellow. And this is, if you're familiar with The King in Yellow, I want to call it a red flag, but I guess I should call it a yellow flag. It is the red flag among red flags. Another way to consider it is if I had a copy of a Lovecraft book, it might resonate more with your modern audience. So much of what Lovecraft is doing is pulling from what Chambers did in The King in Yellow. So The King in Yellow is a 1985 book by Robert W. Chambers of short stories. Notably, the first half of the book is supernatural horror short stories. The second half of the book, notably, is kind of a bunch of romance stories. This is kind of weird, but Chambers was doing a very strange thing, and what so I guess the easiest way to understand it is that the first 4 stories are tied together by if you read anything in The King in Yellow, read the first 3 stories. That's going to tie in most closely to Signalis. The first 3 stories are The Repairer of Reputations, The Mask, and In the Court of the Dragon. And so the way The King in Yellow works is that in the text of The King in Yellow, there is a play called The King in Yellow. Immediately, we're being metafictive. So the play, The King in Yellow, is considered to be the greatest work of fiction ever written. It is brilliant, stunning, it is shocking, it is psychedelic and decadent and rich and supernatural and sublime and beautiful and horrifying all at once. And
so this is not the best song in the world, it's just a tribute. Is that what we're living here with
so
like
kind of
the storytelling device?
So Fran, The problem with The King in Yellow, the play, the most perfect play ever written, is that if you read it, you go mad. It inflicts a madness upon you. So it is banned
Okay.
in countries. It is considered like unreadable for this reason. Some people see it as like a real thing. Some people see it as like it's hokey, supernatural folklore. But in the text of the story, if you read the play, The King in Yellow, you will go mad. You will succumb to either a slow onset or quick onset madness that causes you to generally commit terrible crimes. And so you see throughout each of these stories, at the beginning of each of these stories, you get a clip of the play. So basically, it's usually a song or an interaction between a couple characters. It's never too much, but it's like so the first half of the story of the book is so interested in making you understand that even interacting, like that there are texts, that there are stories, that there is some amalgamation, that there is some way I can organize words in any language and I can send anyone spiraling into madness, right? That is the conceit of The King in Yellow. And the stories are exploring this to a degree, but it's oftentimes told through the lens of highly unreliable narrators who are clearly not flowing with the reality in which we are currently existing. And we have to try to understand what this could possibly mean, right? So in The Repair of Reputations, you have a story about a man who is apparently no longer mad, who is committed to a psych ward and had a doctor who said he's sane and he can be released. But in the story that this man or narrator tells us, Germany invaded America and took over New Jersey and like owns a bunch of land, but the war has settled down, and like all this stuff that you're like, is this really what the world is like? Like, you're like, is this just like an alternate history? Is this an alternate universe? Is this narrator reliable? Yes, and it's part of like World War II.
Germany just has
and,
one
like,
colony
and
in the
during
US,
the
it's New
beginning of the
Jersey.
story and The Repair of Reputations, the government goes so far as to creating oh man, I forget what they're called exactly, like a killing center. Basically, they create like assisted suicide centers throughout the United States. And so I'm getting lost in the sauce here, but the idea of The King in Yellow is that there is a text, there is some amalgamation of language that can cause debilitating mental and physical reactions. The rest of the stories, oftentimes, the next like 5 stories in here are a story about a weird science and love and forlorn love and unrequited love. There's a story about a guy who gets chased by an evil organist, like a church organist, who's bears the yellow sign of The King in Yellow. There's another story about an artist who's bothered by like a weird church watchman. There's a time travel love story. Then we get into all these love stories. And so essentially,
I hope I don't bury the lead here, but is that why you think that Signalis, the first half, there, you never know about the romantic relationship between Elster and Ariane? You're just thinking, oh, I am just a replica in service of this pilot, and I need to go find her. Because she's my pilot, obviously.
Right.
I need to go find her. You don't learn about their romantic relationship until later half in the second half of the game.
a little bit.
Is that
No,
does
so well,
that kind of mirror a little bit? King Yell, am I reading too much
I don't
into
think
it?
so. What I would say, Fran, is that you don't start the game
Am I going
looking for
crazy?
Ariane. You start the game looking for Alina Co. You land on the planet, and no, it's not. So the truth is, you land on the planet.
Is
your
that
pilot
true?
is Ariane.
Cool.
You're told to go find Ariane, and then when you get to the facility, you like find a note, and you're like, I have to find Alina CO. I find this picture. I have to find Alina. I have to find Alina. And you spend the entire first half of the game looking for a person called Alina CO.
Yeah.
Ariane doesn't come back up until the beginning of the second half of the game. So she's briefly mentioned.
Yeah,
she's
that's
replaced
fair.
immediately by this character, Alina CO, who is either
Yep,
Ariane before her hair turned white, before she succumbed to radiation poisoning, or is maybe an interpretation of Elster herself.
So what you're saying is Ariane is Kyrie and Alina CO is nominated.
Yes, that's exactly what I was hoping that you would just take me there the whole way. And yes,
Nomura,
it's
you
Nomura
did it
all the way
again.
down. That all of this to be said that The King in Yellow is
sorry.
an intensely important piece of literature because it's considered a lot of like a forerunner for a lot of cosmic horror, which is exactly what Signalis is cosmic horror. Unknowable acts, unbelievably powerful, like extraordinary, extra-worldly, extra-planar abilities, impacting and twisting and forcing reality to change. But at its core, The King in Yellow is interested in both how we can take a horror story and turn it into a romance novel, which is what happens in the stories. The last, one of the last stories in The King in Yellow is The Street of Our Lady of the Fields, which is about romantic American bohemians in Paris. That's directly from the Wikipedia, right? The last story kind of impacts the Repair of Reputations a little bit, but it's neither here nor there. So there's this direct line between horror and romance, horror and love, madness and love that takes place in The King in Yellow, which is, I think, a framing narrative and a scaffold text for what happens in Signalis, because it's one of the first references. It's one of the earliest references we get directly given to us by authors. And it's one of the last references we get right before we fight the final boss. You find the King in Yellow. You open the seal. You find the King in Yellow. You open the seal. And so I see the King in Yellow as a framing narrative that is coloring and shaping any reading of this text, because it is a text that, I guess I should say, Signalis is a text that is intensely interested in how we can change and affect reality with maybe not our words. Maybe we can't arrange words in such a way to impact our reality in Signalis, but we can arrange our feelings. We can arrange our emotions to impact reality, either through flashbacks through our life, changing the ways in which we interact with what we perceive as reality, which matters less and less and less as we become reactivated copies of copies of copies of copies, or in a more bioresonant reading like mine, the ways in which we can arrange our emotions to restructure reality around us. And that's a bit of where I'm coming at it from. We learn in Ariane's history that the King in Yellow is in the E2's bookstore, and that's where she encounters it for the very first time, is at Rotfront. And
even though it's, I think, banned, right? I think
and then it disappears the next day. She never even reads it. She finds it. She's like, that's kind of interesting. And then it's gone the next day. And then you find a correspondence from one of the protector units saying that they confiscated books from the E2's bookstore. And so for me, I kind of saw, anytime you hear the King in Yellow, whenever you're looking at the story, it's kind of like a signal that's directly pointing to onset psychosis, onset madness, and the imposition of perceived realities onto actual realities. And all of those words, perceived, actual, reality, the whole idea of it is supposed to become fuzzier and fuzzier and fuzzier and fuzzier the more you play the game, because it's impossible to actually know what's going on when the ending that you get as a player is based on how you play it. So the ending of the story changes based on who's playing the game. So the story changes based on who's playing the game. So Fran, you, the red eye, looking down on everything, perceiving the story, making these decisions for Elster in regards to Ariane, you are physically shaping the reality of the story Signalis. And so,
It's like Schrodinger's cat thought
yeah,
experiment. You are affecting by just observing it, you are affecting the outcome.
exactly. That's my long and short on The King in Yellow. There's more to it. It's a really great piece. I highly recommend checking out at least the first few stories. If you don't like reading it, I was actually able to get a really good audiobook. It is in public domain. You can get it from your library.
Oh,
Everybody go out and get your library cards. That's how they get funding from the government, so that's important. You can get on the Libby app, and you can go and borrow an audiobook copy of The King in Yellow for free, $0.00, and just listen to it. And I'll see if I can find a link to the version I listened to, but the narrator was phenomenal.
I will want to listen to that. So yes, please, anything I can to get more Signalis in my life, because this is a game that we mentioned how, and I guess we're entering the realm of closing statements, but I mentioned how this game, time will tell if I kind of want to give it a little bit more time to gestate on it to see if it would actually enter my top 10, like what would be games that I would have to consider kicking out to allow this one into my top 10. And one of those things that I wanted to think about was what is the experience of replaying this game. And
Right.
and after I finished it, I didn't want to replay it, not because it wasn't good or because I knew the ending, but this was just so powerful and emotionally like taxing on me that I can't really. It's like watching a very sad movie and being like, I can only watch this movie depending if I'm in certain like moods or whatever. And this time, knowing what is at the end of the tunnel is going to be very important. And hopefully getting these contexts and King in Yellow and all this fun stuff will give me even more a more appreciative or a different view on all of this, because some of the things that I want to bring up for this podcast is that there are some games that we're considering playing that I've played, but I played such a long time ago that I'm really excited to revisit.
Yeah.
And I think this is a game that I'm going to be very excited to revisit in 5 years, 10 years time.
I agree. I'm really looking forward to my next playthrough, but I don't think it'll be anytime soon.
Exactly.
I do want to mention, it's kind of at the end here, and we didn't, we're going on 3 hours now, so I do want to wrap. I feel a little, like maybe we left something on the table here, but I do think that in my reading, at least, it needs to be mentioned that part of the love story between Elster and Ariane is her coming to terms with her homosexuality and her celebrating that homosexuality, her celebrating that she can come out and that she can finally be herself. This is in the text of the game. This is in her diaries. And that is part of, I think, what hits so hard about the tragedy in this love story. And I don't think we brought it up enough. It just didn't land in our conversation.
Yeah,
but I mean, I do think it's there that it's a lot of, I think, what happens, especially in the first half of the game, can be tied to this idea that Ariane is experiencing shame and is emotionally and maybe thereby physically burying parts of herself. And we uncover things that we bury. We uncover things deep in the earth with a mine.
That's interesting that you say it that way, and I think that is definitely a valid interpretation. I did not read into any shame due to sexuality. Maybe it's because I was thinking more of the future in retrofuturism, and it's like, obviously this is a universe spanning world. It is matriarchal
It is that.
It is matriarchal. So for some reason, at least for me, it just made kind of sense that lesbian was a very normalized sexual identity. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and so I guess whenever I did read those stories of her feeling shame and all these things, it was for other reasons and not sexuality. Yeah. I'm not saying, so I'm not like I said, different people had different interpretations. I could definitely see that being something that if you are coming to terms with your sexuality, that maybe this you will see that in this game more. Unfortunately, I am a cis man, so I did not see that. But yeah, that's a good point.
No, I think there's certainly different. I kind of read it when like I mentioned with the idea of the mine. I kind of clung to this idea of we're going deeper and deeper and deeper, especially as we get to nowhere. And generally,
The super ego.
yeah,
And
exactly.
all
I
that
start
stuff.
to associate that with like very classic themes of burying things and uncovering things and right, like what's horror about? Why are we as people so interested in the genre of horror? Well, it's because it explores the abject, it explores our shames, our fears, our anxieties, and it is in many ways a form of like safe play, if you will, to explore these concepts and things that people find horrifying, things that people cite as scary stories or horror stories change over the years as they reflect different horrors and insecurities and anxieties in a society, right? Like if you read Dracula today, right? The preeminent horror novel, Bram Stoker. I hate that book. Fucking hate that book. But that's neither here nor there. Take it up with me in Discord. And that is a book that is exploring Victorian prudishness. It is so interested in sex. It is so interested in blood and sucking and like flesh and consuming and like draining and all this stuff because and Dracula is a very is like a very sexual character in just his like sensuality and the way he treats he treats the characters in the story. And yet all of that exists because the Victorian era in England was deeply prudish, and there was this uncovering of repressed sexual tendencies and frustrations in polite Victorian society. And so that horror novel struck because it was pulling on those threads. And I think Signalis is doing that too. There's a latent horror in the sense of the meat of it all, the body of it all. And I think that comes from like a societal Western removal from like food. Like we don't have on average, I would say the average American, the average Western citizen is probably not very in tune with how their food is made, right? We don't butcher animals ourselves. Maybe a fish is the most that an average person might do. You're not killing chickens and plucking them. You're not de-gutting them. You're not butchering. Butchery is a lost art at this point. So I think when you see elements of like terrors of body horror and flesh and meat, it's contending with the reality that we are animals and we are flesh and meat. And so that's kind of where I tie in this idea of horror with Signalis, and I think I lost the thread there, to be honest. But
sir, this is a Wendy's.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think with that, we should.
I think that you should be valid in speaking all these things. I think that these are very good conversations to be had. I think that if we can continue talking about this game, like we said, this is probably in our top 10s now. So we could definitely go other hour or two talking about the different birds in the game and what do they mean, what are the fetish objects of different characters, why Mina is the best replica unit. Based opinion, I know. But all this to say, you've already heard my final verdict. Go play it. If you want to go play a zombie game or like a game where you shoot monsters, don't play this game. If you want to play a game where you need to know what happens plot wise to get emotional or story gratification out of the story, do not play this. But anybody else, do it. It deserves more than 7.1 million in revenue. How about you, Jason?
Play the damn game, man. This game is great. This is easily in my top 10. This might be the best game that I played in this in this experience right now. I mean, it's
Definitely.
it's really up
Definitely
there.
that.
It really listen, I Banjo-Kazooie was great, but no, but in all seriousness, Signalis really struck me as completely out of left field. I didn't anticipate it. I kind of thought it was going to be like a Resident Evil, and there's so much to do and so much to talk about. If I could, I would teach a class with this game in
Yeah.
it easily. So I highly recommend you check it out. And moreover, I highly recommend that you bring your discussion to our Discord. The link will be in the show notes below. I cannot stress how much we would really love to see you there. We're trying to get some more action on our Discord because we want to ask questions to our listeners. We want to involve you as much as we possibly can in the production of this. We want your feedback on the episodes. Is it, how is it sounding? How does the music come out? Is it good for you in the car? Is it good for you in your earbuds? Like whatever, all of that nitty gritty stuff is more than welcome. We just want to interact with you there. We're we're kind of pulling back from social media. So if you're here and you're still listening, thank you so much for joining us on Use Your Items. We are a podcast about the philosophy and design of video games. My name has been and will continue to be Jason Weiss. And with me as always is
Francisco Martin, unless I have forgotten myself and I am not myself and I'm a replica of a copy of a copy. Oh God, who am I? I gotta go take a nap.
All right. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a great week. And as always, we'll see you on the Discord.
Along the shore, the cloud waves break. The twin suns shake behind the lake. The shadows lengthen in Carcosa. Strange is the night where black stars rise, and strange